be an atheist, Dr. Frank Turek. Right here.
Thanks, Shane. Good evening, warriors. Shane's going to tell us more about Ratio Christi a little bit later. The co-author of this book, Dr. Norman L. Geisler, graduated from Wayne State University. That's right. That's right. But I want to go back to September 29th, 2006. That's when Petty Officer Michael Mansour is a United States Navy SEAL operating in Ramadi, Iraq. Mansour is standing on a roof in Ramadi, and he's standing in front of a doorway to this roof. He has two Navy SEAL teammates lying in the sniper-prone position at his feet. They've already taken AK-47 fire and a rocket-propelled grenade, but they're not exactly sure where the enemy is. There's a bit of a lull in the fighting. Insurgents have blocked off the streets in Ramadi, and there's someone on a loudspeaker saying, "Kill the Americans!" As Mansour and his team are looking for the next attack, an insurgent from an unknown location throws a grenade up on the roof. It hits Mansour in the chest, and it falls to his feet. Due to the length of the throw, there's no opportunity to pick it up and throw it back. He has only a split second to make a decision. He can leap through the doorway behind him and save himself, but if he does, his two teammates lying at his feet will surely die. Mansour yells, "Grenade!" But instead of jumping backward to save himself, he jumps forward chest first onto the grenade. It detonates. 30 minutes later, 25-year-old Michael Mansour is dead. His two teammates lying at his feet receive only minor injuries because Mansour's body muffled the blast. One of the survivors said at Mansour's funeral, "Mikey looked death in the face that day and said, 'You will not take my friends, I will go in their stead.'" I've never seen a United States president cry until April of 2008. That's when President George W. Bush invited Mansour's parents into the East Room to give them their son's Medal of Honor posthumously. The president couldn't even get through the citation without breaking down. Since then, Mansour's high school in Garden Grove, California, built a new stadium. They named it Michael A. Mansour Memorial Stadium. The golden trident insignia that the SEALs wear dominates the 50-yard line. January 2019, North Island, California, just outside of San Diego, the United States Navy commissioned the USS Michael Mansour, the newest guided missile destroyer in the fleet, Zumwalt class. There's only 3 ships in the world like this, and one of them is named after Michael Mansour. This is Mansour's mother, Sally, being escorted onto the ship, named in honor of her fallen son. Now, why did they do this? Because Michael Mansour literally sacrificed himself to save his friends. There's no greater love than to sacrifice yourself to save your friends, said Jesus of Nazareth before he went to the cross. Michael Mansour sacrificed himself to save his friends. The question is, would anyone sacrifice himself to save you? And the answer is, someone already has. His name is Jesus of Nazareth. But in today's culture, a lot of people don't think the story's true. They think it's invented. After all, it was written down by religious people. We know religious people can tend to embellish things. And it's got miracles in it, like a resurrection. Who here in this room has seen someone rise from the dead after you knew they were dead for at least 36 hours? Yeah, none of us. Why? Because it doesn't happen. Yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe something none of us have ever seen. How rational is that? Well, I actually think it's quite easy to show that Christianity is true. You only need to answer 4 questions. In other words, if you investigate these 4 questions, I think you'll realize that the answer to these 4 questions is yes, And if the answer to these 4 questions is yes, then Christianity's true. Not just true for me, not just true for you, but true like gravity's true. What are the 4 questions? Here are the 4 questions. Now that is some pretty grooving music, isn't it? Yeah. That's actually from our TV show, which is on every Wednesday night. Hey, that's tonight, 9 p.m. It's on DirecTV channel 378. If you don't have DirecTV, it's on Roku. Does anyone here have Roku? You guys know what Roku is? Okay. Look for NRB TV on Roku. That's National Religious Broadcasters. If you don't have DirecTV and you don't have Roku, it's on this new technology sweeping Detroit right now. It's called the Internet. Have you guys heard of this? Yeah, it's on our website right there. Just tune in at that time. We're also on radio, a bunch of stations around the country, but it doesn't matter if it's on radio because it's podcasted. You can listen to it anytime you want. It's called the I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist podcast. We do 2 a week, actually. What we do is we present evidence for Christianity and we cross-examine ideas against it. Now, why are these the 4 questions? Truth, God, miracles, and the New Testament. And this is going to serve as our outline here tonight. First question, does truth exist? Why is that important? Because you hear people saying there's no truth. You got your truth. I got my truth. All truth is relative. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is no truth, Christianity can't be true. Of course, if there is no truth, atheism can't be true either, right? Now, of course, there's truth, ladies and gentlemen. If there was no truth, would you ever go to school? I mean, well, why are you coming here? Hopefully to learn truth. Would you ever read a book if there was no truth? Would you ever be able to catch someone in a lie if there was no truth? No, lies presuppose truth. So we're going to deal with that first. Second question, does God exist? Christianity can't be true if there's no God. I hope to show you tonight through 3 arguments from about 10,000 feet. We don't have a lot of time to cover them in detail, but we're going to see that it appears that God exists. And these arguments, while they're in the Bible, you don't need the Bible to know them. In fact, people knew there was a God long before there was any written revelation. Okay, so we're going to look at those arguments. Then, are miracles possible? I just asked you if anyone's seen a resurrection. Nobody said yes. But I hope to show you tonight that not only are miracles possible, but the greatest miracle in the Bible, even atheists are admitting the evidence for. Then we're going to look at the key question, is the New Testament true? The New Testament doesn't have a prayer if there's no truth, no God, or no miracles. But if truth exists, if God exists, if miracles are possible, then we're going to see if the New Testament is historically reliable enough. We're not talking about being inerrant or the Word of God, just if these documents are historically reliable enough to let us know if one event from the ancient world took place. If this event took place, Christianity is true. If the event didn't take place, it's false. What's the event? The resurrection. If Jesus predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, then game over, Christianity's true. If he didn't, then game over, it's false. In fact, Paul even says this in his first letter to the church at Corinth. If Christ hasn't been risen from the dead, your faith is in vain. Do you realize that Christianity is a worldview you can investigate and discover whether or not it's true? It's not just someone's philosophy. You can discover if these events took place in history. Now, from that point, the book goes into detail on how to show the Bible's the Word of God, but we won't have time for that tonight. But what we're going to do is we're going to start right here at point 1. Does truth exist? And later we'll get to Q&A. All right, you guys ready to go? Yeah. All right. Now, whenever you start talking about truth, you always have to start with Jack Nicholson. Right? Because Tom Cruise had him on the witness stand, and he said to him, "Colonel, I want the truth." And Nicholson said, "You can't handle the truth." That was pretty lame, warriors. One guy had it, the rest of you were... I mean, he didn't say it that way. He didn't say, "You can't handle that." If he said it that way, the movie would have gone nowhere, all right? Here's how he said it. All right, let's try that again. "I want the truth." You can't handle the truth. Now that felt better, didn't it? Yeah. Didn't you always want to do that here at the school? You know, some professors up here and you yell, "You can't handle the truth." But look, there's a lot of people that can't handle the truth. They're saying, "You got your truth, I got my truth. All truth is relative." How do you deal with these claims? Well, to show you what a dimwit I was, I was 33 years old, I already had a master's degree, and I did not know what I'm about to tell you right now. And you know why I didn't know? Because I never had a course in logic. How many people in here have had a real course in logic? Can I see your hands, please? All right, see these people with their hands up? These are the homeschoolers. Here they are, right here. Right. Except for Dr. Russell, he's exempt. He went to school a long time ago, right? Yeah, that's right, that's right. You taught a course in logic, right? Okay, so he's taught a course in logic, right? But we don't teach logic in public school anymore. Would it be a lot better if we did? Instead of teaching kids how to think, we're teaching them what to feel. And that can be dangerous. Why? Because if you start following your feelings, absent of reason or moral restraint, you're going to wind up in a very dark place. So what we're going to talk about today is called the law of non-contradiction. It's a fundamental law of all logic. It says opposite ideas cannot both be true at the same time and in the same sense. For example, we can't both be in Detroit and not in Detroit at the same time and in the same sense. It's one or the other, but not both. You guys with me? God can't both exist and not exist at the same time and in the relativistic claim, there is no truth. If someone were to say to you, there is no truth, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? Yeah, is that true? Is it true that there's no truth? Because if it's true that there's no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? Yeah. I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough. But that's because this is what we call a self-defeating statement. The self-defeating statement violates the law of non-contradiction. If this statement is true, it's false, right? Because it claims to be true. At the same time, it says there are no truths. It would be like if I said I can't speak a word in English. What would you say? Hey, you're using English to say it. Or if I said my parents had no kids that lived. Or my brother is an only child, right? These are self-defeating statements, and you've got to get good at recognizing self-defeating statements. And here's how you do it. What you do is you turn the claim on itself. You turn the claim on itself. So if somebody says there's no truth, you ask a question about that claim by saying, is that true? All right? Now, you can amaze your friends with this because you're not being unkind. You're not making statements. You're simply asking questions. Someone says there's no truth. You say, is that true? All right, let's just do a few more of these. Suppose someone were to say to you, there's no such thing as absolute truth. If you were to turn the claim on itself, what question would you ask them? Is that an absolute truth? Or you might want to say, are you absolutely sure? Can everybody see this is an absolute truth claim, claiming there are no absolute truths? Again, it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Now, in our society, it's not said much this way anymore. It's often more said, or at least intimated this way. There isn't the truth, only my truth. You know, you have your truth, I have my truth, you live your truth, I live my truth, we'll all get along. I mean, this sounds so right. It sounds like we all ought to believe this. It sounds so Oprah, doesn't it? Yeah, there's just one big problem with it. It violates the law of non-contradiction. Why? Because if somebody says there isn't the truth, only my truth, simply ask them, is that just your truth or the truth? In other words, is the statement on top just your truth? In other words, is it just your opinion? If it is, why should I believe it? But if you're saying the statement on the top is the truth, for everyone, can't you see the first half of that statement says there aren't any the truths? Can everyone see this is a the truth claim, claiming there are no the truth claims? Again, it's like saying I can't speak a word in English. Now, it's very unpopular in our culture to say this, but I've got to say it anyway. There's no such thing as your truth. There's no such thing as my truth. There's just the truth. I mean, if you want to say you have your own truth, you might as well say I have my own math. I mean, imagine if Shane said to me, hey, Frank, can you hang around Wayne State tomorrow? We got a lot of work to do around here. If you could help me out, I'd really appreciate it. You know, just hang out, work as many hours as you can. I'll pay you $10 an hour. Just tell me how many hours you work at the end of the day, I'll pay you. Now, actually, Shane would never do this. He doesn't pay that much. All right. But let's suppose I did. I work dawn to dusk, and I'm done. I work 15 hours. He says, okay, what do I owe you? And I go, let's say, okay, $10 an hour times 15 hours, you owe me $150,000. He goes, no, I don't owe you $150,000. I owe you $150,000. And I go, oh, no, you don't understand. I have my own math. There's not my math or your math. There's just math. Now, parents, I'm not talking about the kind of math your kid brings home and you go, hey, this isn't my math. I'm not talking about that, all right? But there's one answer to a math problem. It's not my answer or your answer. It's the answer. There's not my truth or your truth. It's the truth. Now, this is probably even bigger than this in our culture right now, and that is, you ought not judge, especially if you're a Christian. Jesus said, don't judge. Why are you judging, you hypocrites? All right, let's put Jesus aside for just a second. What's the logical problem with this claim? Yes, if somebody says, you ought not judge, you might want to say, hey, isn't that a judgment? Or you might want to say, if we're not to judge, then why are you judging me for judging? Now, did Jesus say don't judge? Nope. He never said it. Sure he did, Frank. He said it in his most famous sermon, the Sermon on the Mount. This is Matthew 7, verse 1. He says, judge not. All right, I know it's going to sound weird for just a minute for you Christians in here, but stick with me, it's true. There are no verses in the Bible. There are no verses in the Bible. Do you think when Matthew, who wrote his biography that we now call a gospel, got to this point, he said, here's chapter 7, verse 1? No. When were the chapter and verse divisions added? About 500 years ago to help us navigate the text, which is really important. It'd be really hard to find your way around this big series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible if you didn't have numbers. I mean, imagine if your pastor didn't have numbers in his Bible and you didn't have numbers in yours, and every Sunday he just got up, he opened this big book and he looked at you and he went, let's go about 2/3 of the way in, let's see if we can find the same spot. Like, you couldn't do that, right? You need numbers to help find your way around. The problem is we tend to think if it's got a number in front of it, we can take it out and make it say whatever we want devoid of its context. We can't do that. Now, some of you are going to hate me for this, but I don't care. I'm leaving tomorrow. All right? This is why you should never say Jeremiah 29:11 is a promise to you. What's Jeremiah 20? You know Jeremiah 29:11. I mean, this is on pillows. This is on coffee mugs. This is on posters. Oh, the plans I have for you. Plans to give you hope in a future. Plans to prosper you. Is that a promise to 21st century Christians living in Detroit, Michigan today? No. Who's that a promise to? If you look at the context, that's a promise to the exiles who were forcibly taken out of Judah in 586 BC by the Babylonian dictator Nebuchadnezzar. He took them all the way to Babylon, modern-day Iraq, and God, through the prophet Jeremiah, was telling that group of people that 70 years later, he was going to bring them back into the land and prosper them. And it happened, by the way, in 516 BC. They went back into the land and began to build the temple. But this is not a promise to us today. For people who say, I'm claiming Jeremiah 29:11 as a promise to me, I say, why don't you claim Jeremiah 44:11 as a promise to you? What's Jeremiah 44:11? Jeremiah 44:11 is the promise God made to the exiles that tried to go to Egypt. And he warned them, don't go to Egypt. You know what Jeremiah 44:11 says? It says, I will destroy you and all Judah. You don't see that stitched into a pillow. You don't see that on a coffee mug. You don't see that on a birthday card, happy birthday. I will destroy you and all Judah. That is so sweet, Grandma. Thank you so much. No, we're taking stuff out of context. The Bible is not a collection of Chinese fortune cookies. Okay? You don't just take a verse out and make it say whatever you want, and the same thing is true in Matthew 7:1. Does Jesus say, judge not, and he stops right there? No, what does he say? He says, judge not, lest you be judged. By the same standard you judge others, you be judged by that standard. So before you try and take the speck out of your brother's eye, you hypocrite, notice you hypocrites, a judgment. Take the log out of your own eye first, then you'll be better able to help your brother. And then he goes on to talk about don't cast your pearls before swine, which requires a whole nother series of judgments. Is Jesus telling us not to make judgments? No, he's telling us to take the speck out of our brother's eye. He's simply saying, get that problem out of your life first so you can better help your brother. So this is not a command not to judge. It's actually a command on how to judge. In other words, don't judge hypocritically. If you've got that problem, fix it, and then go help your brother. But it would be completely ridiculous to say don't make judgments. Number one, it's a judgment itself. Number two, you'd be dead already if you didn't make judgments. You made 100 judgments just getting over here tonight. Now you're going, this was a bad judgment. This guy's crazy. No. Everybody makes judgments. Atheists make judgments. They judge there's no God. They judge Jesus didn't rise from the dead. Bible's not telling the truth. There is no objective meaning or purpose to life. When you die, you're just going to become worm food. It's over. Have a nice day. These are all judgments. The question isn't whether or not you can make judgments. The question is, are your judgments true? This is why Jesus elsewhere said, stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. You got to make a judgment, whether you're going to be an atheist, a Buddhist, a Hindu, a Muslim, a Christian, an agnostic. You got to make a judgment. Everybody makes judgments. I will say this, though. Jesus did save a very stern rebuke for people who were judgmental. And who were the judgmental ones in his day? Pharisees. And who were the Pharisees? They were the religious and political leaders of Israel. Some of them were on the Sanhedrin. That was the lawmaking court, the lawmaking body. They were politicians. And Jesus went after these people. Are you telling me Jesus got involved in politics? Yes! And he wasn't so nice doing it. In fact, if you think Jesus was a sweet guy who's never said a bad word about anyone, you have not read John chapter 2, John chapter 8, or Matthew chapter 23. What happens in John chapter 2? Jesus makes a whip and he goes and he jacks people up in the temple. Sweet and gentle Jesus said this? Yes! And then in John chapter 8, he's having an argument with these same Pharisee politicians. He's right in the middle of an argument with them when he says, your father is the devil. Jesus, you can't say that. That's not very Christ-like. Excuse me, I am Christ? Can you imagine you have an argument with somebody and you stop right in the middle and you go, your father is the devil. Never try that with a sibling, by the way. And then in Matthew 23, Jesus really goes off on these Pharisee politicians. He says, what are you scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites? You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. Oh, you look great on the outside. You're whitewashed tombs, but on the inside, you're full of dead men's bones. You go a mile to make a convert, and then once you make them a convert, you make them twice as much a son of hell as you are. How will you avoid being condemned to hell? What? Sweet and gentle Jesus? Yes. Jesus was not Barney. Can't we all get along, boys and girls? No! I came to bring a sword. It's going to divide mother and daughter, father and son. How often do you hear those passages talked about? You know, Jesus did not come to bring unity with the world. He came to bring unity in the church. You never hear those passages talked about, but some of you know those passages are true because you're divided in your own family over Jesus. And you should be. If Jesus is the truth, you ought to be following him. Not what your family says, not what your culture says. You ought to be following him. So Jesus was tough. In fact, why do you think they killed Jesus? Number one, he claimed to be God. That was blasphemy to the Jews and sedition to the Romans. And number two, he annoyed some really powerful people like Caiaphas, the high priest, who sentenced Jesus to die. I think Caiaphas knew Jesus was the Messiah. Why? Because after Jesus raises Lazarus from the dead, Caiaphas wants to kill Lazarus and Jesus, and he says, it's better that one innocent man die than the whole nation perish. He didn't want to lose his job. If Jesus is the Messiah, there's no need for a temple anymore. In fact, where's the temple now? Yeah, look at the person next to you. If that person's a Christian, that's where the temple is now. You don't need a temple if Jesus has come. So Jesus was tough, and he annoyed some powerful people. Men love darkness rather than light. They don't want the light to come and shine on what they're doing. In fact, Augustine said, we love the truth when it enlightens us. We hate the truth when it convicts us. A few military people in here. By the way, I was in the Navy for 8 years, which stands for Never Again Volunteer Yourself. You always get more flack when you're over the target. If you tell somebody something that's true and they're shooting back at you, you're over the target. They don't want their evil deeds exposed, and you're exposing them. So, we have to make judgments, but we have to make judgments without being judgmental. There's nobody in this room and nobody outside this room that's going to make it to God because you're any better than anyone else. The only way you're going to make it to God is on his work, not yours, because he is perfect and he paid for your sins by taking your punishment upon himself. So we've got to make judgments, but we can't be judgmental about it. So we could spend much more time if we had it on self-defeating statements. We don't have time. I just want to sum it up this way. Can everybody see that this statement right here shoots itself? Can everybody see that? Which means relativism and postmodernism are false because they claim it's true that there is no truth. Now, tragically, many of our high schools and many of our universities have bought into the truth that there is no truth. Why would you spend any money learning from somebody who doesn't believe in truth? Isn't that why you're here? To learn truth? By the way, we go to a lot of colleges. This is an event we did at the University of Wisconsin at Madison, and they love the Bible there about as much as the University of California at Berkeley does. And we always have a microphone set up for Q&A. We have this one set up here today, and sometimes if someone who's not a Christian gets up to the microphone, I may ask them a question, and if you're not a Christian and you're here tonight, thank you for being here. But I want to warn you in advance, I may ask you this question because it's not fair to me to do that. I'm supposed to be answering questions, so it's not fair for me to just throw a question on you without giving you fair warning so you can think about it. Here's the question I may ask you. If Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? I've had non-Christians stand at that microphone in front of hundreds of people and say, no! No. Wait, you're an atheist and you claim to be reasonable? And I ask you if something were true, would you believe it? And you say no? How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not. The problem isn't here. The problem's here. They don't want it to be true. They don't want there to be a God. Why? Because they want to be God over their own lives. And half the time, Christians are the same way, aren't we? We want to be God over our own lives. We're not on a truth quest. We're on a happiness quest. And we're just going to believe whatever we think is going to make us happy. Here's the problem. You can make yourself happy over the short term, doing a lot of fun, but ultimately selfish and sinful things, yet over the long term, it's a disaster. And everyone in here who's over 40 years old knows what I'm talking about, because many of us have tried it ourselves. I'm going to live my way. It's going to be all about me. No, you're not. You're not going to live very long that way. If you do, who's going to put up with it? If you become a total me monster, where you're doing whatever you want, whenever you want to do it, with whomever you want to do it, how long are your relationships going to last? If you want contentment, you've got to go straight through truth, and Jesus is the truth. If you live just for yourself, you're probably going to wind up divorced, addicted, broken, alone, and probably prematurely dead. So, truth does exist. The next question, is it true that God exists? And I mentioned we're going to look at 3 arguments for God. The first argument for God is from the beginning of the universe, known as the cosmological argument. Now, cosmological just comes from the Greek word cosmos, which means world or universe. And it says if the universe had a beginning, then it must have had a beginner. The second argument is the argument from design, known as the teleological argument. Telos is a Greek word meaning design or purpose. And this is the argument that says if there's design in the universe and design in you, life, there has to be a designer. Now, these 2 arguments have some scientific evidence behind them. We'll get to that. The third argument doesn't have any science behind it. It's more philosophical in nature, yet it's the argument we've all known since we were very small children. It's the argument from morality known as the moral argument. And it says if there's one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, or it's wrong to murder 6 million people in a Holocaust, then there has to be a God. Why? Because if there is no standard beyond humanity that we're all obligated to obey, then everything's just a matter of opinion. That's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion, or your opinion against Hitler's opinion. Unless that standard exists, it's a total free-for-all. We'll get to that later, but we got to start right here at the cosmological argument. Now, you got to admit, it was worth coming here tonight just to see God do that. Did you guys see that? Yeah. Some of you said, I've never seen God move. Oh, really? Check this out. Look at that. Now, this is the argument that many say points back to the big... Now, I know there's some Christians in here going, Frank, you know, we're Christians in here, and we don't believe in the Big Bang. You guys don't believe in the Big Bang? I believe in the Big Bang. I just know who banged it. In fact, the evidence for the Big Bang is so good that even atheistic scientists have admitted it. Stephen Hawking, who was probably the top physicist in the world until he died about 7 years ago, said this: almost everyone now believes that the universe and time itself had a beginning at the Big Bang. Now, Hawking tried to come up with another explanation other than God. He failed, but he's admitting the data, that space-time and matter literally had a beginning out of nothing. Agnostic cosmologist Alexander Vilenkin said this. He said, with the proof now in place, cosmologists, by the way, a cosmologist is not someone that puts on your makeup, all right? That's someone that studies the universe. Cosmologists can no longer hide behind the possibility of a past eternal universe. There is now no escape. They have to face the problem of a cosmic beginning. Now, there's a couple of interesting words in this quote, to me anyway. The first is the word proof. Unusual for scientists to use the word proof. Why? Because science, by definition, is tentative. New information can come in and overturn older theories, and that happens all the time. But Vilenkin is saying he sees so much evidence pointing toward a beginning that he's willing to call it a proof. The other interesting word is the word problem. How could it be a problem that the universe had a beginning? Well, if all you believe is the natural and you think there's no supernatural, if all of nature had a beginning, what could have created that? Only something outside of nature. And we'll see what it could be here in just a minute. He's calling that a problem. Now, we're not going to go through the scientific evidence for this. Why? Number one, we don't have time. Number two, it's all in the book, chapter 3. And number three, it's not all that controversial. Even the atheists are admitting it. What is controversial is what caused the universe to have a beginning. Before we get to that, I want to give one piece of evidence that seems to me is irrefutable that the universe had a beginning. It's not scientific, it's more philosophical in nature. Here it is. Look at this timeline here. There's today, there's yesterday, there's the day before yesterday, there's last week, all right? Let's say we don't know how far back this timeline goes. Question, can this timeline be infinite into the past? No, why not? You guys are sounding like Charlie Brown's teacher right now. Go ahead, what'd you say? You would never arrive to today if there were an infinite number of days before today. Because if there were an infinite number of days before today, there would always be another day before you got to this day you'd have to live. Because there's an infinite number of them. But since today is here, there can only be a finite number of days before today. So if the past were infinite, today never would have arrived. Which means time was created. If time was created, whatever created time must transcend time. And if time had a beginning, which it seems it has, whatever created it is outside of time. If you're outside of time, do you have a beginning? No, which means you don't have a cause, which means the question, who made God, doesn't make any sense. Because the uncaused cause doesn't have a cause. That's the point. So let's just jump to the bottom line. If the universe had a beginning, it must have had a beginner. We've got two options. Either no one created something out of nothing, which is the atheistic view, or someone created something out of nothing, which is the theistic view. Now, my only question is, which view is more reasonable? What do you think? Which view is more reasonable, one or two? Two. I was at Texas A&M, had to be 15 years ago, and some atheist said, oh, I think number one is more reasonable. I said, time out. Let's look at number two. Number two says, someone created something out of nothing. Now, that's a miracle, right? But at least you got a miracle worker. You got someone. Number one is a miracle with no miracle worker. That's clearly absurd. In fact, I said to the audience that night at Texas A&M, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, and by the way, the law of causality doesn't say everything has a cause. The law of causality says everything that comes to be has a cause. There has to be an uncaused first cause somewhere. It's either the universe or something outside the universe. Anyway, I said to the audience at A&M that night, I said, to show you how seriously we all take the law of causality, that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. There is nobody sitting here in this auditorium tonight who is currently worried that as you sit here, a hippopotamus has appeared out of nothing, by nothing, in your dorm room and is currently defecating on your pillow. You're not worried about that. Why? Because you know that things don't pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause. You're not worried that a raging Bengal tiger is just going to appear out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause and devour somebody in here, right? Why? Because you know that doesn't happen. And if things like an entire universe could pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause, why doesn't everything do so? Why don't Ferraris pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? You wake up one morning, you look out in your driveway, your Hyundai is a Ferrari. That would be cool, right? Why don't MacBook Pros pop into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? Could have saved me $3 grand. If you're hungry tonight after this and you want to have a pizza, does it make sense to order one, or should you just sit in your kitchen, wait, and hope one pops into existence out of nothing, by nothing, without a cause? No, it seems to me the atheists have all the faith here, the blind faith. In fact, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. Everyone believes in at least one miracle. Christians believe in this miracle and several others. But some atheists will say, yeah, no one created something out of nothing. They're believing this miracle, that no one created something out of nothing. By the way, the law of causality is one of the foundations of all science. If you don't believe every effect has a cause, how can you do science? That's what science does. It looks for causes. It tries to find what particular cause caused a particular effect. Here's a question that Leibniz brought up many years ago. If there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? I mean, if there is no God, why does the universe exist? Why do I exist? Why do you exist? Why do the Dallas Cowboys exist? I mean, if there's ever evidence for Satan, it's right there. All right? Come on. Why does anything exist if there is no God? Now, think about this, ladies and gentlemen. If the universe had a beginning, in other words, space-time and matter had a beginning, what could have caused space-time and matter to have a beginning? Only something outside of space-time and matter. In other words, the cause must therefore be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create. Because to go from a state of nothingness to a state of creation, someone had to make a choice, and only persons can make choices. Also, the cause would have to be intelligent to have a mind to make a choice. Ladies and gentlemen, when you think about a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause, who do you think of? God. You say, how do you know it's the Christian God, Frank? We don't. Yet, this could be Allah or some other theistic or deistic God. But if we keep going through the evidence and we realize that Jesus predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, then we can say that the same being that walked out of the tomb 1,992 years ago is the same being in whose divine nature created the universe out of nothing. We haven't gotten there yet. There's no argument that gets you all the way to the Christian God, no scientific argument. But you get 6 attributes which could be the Christian God. You guys with me so far? Yeah. All right, next argument from design, the teleological argument. There are 2 aspects of this. We'll only have time to look at one aspect. The universe is designed, and it's sometimes called fine-tuning. Scientists have discovered in recent decades that the universe is so fine-tuned that if you were to change any one of a number of factors virtually imperceptibly about our universe, either the universe wouldn't exist at all, or if it did, it couldn't support life. And we'll start with, again, Stephen Hawking, an atheist, who said this: if the expansion rate of the universe was different by 1 part in 1,000 million a second after the Big Bang, the universe would have collapsed or never developed galaxies. In other words, if the expansion rate was that infinitesimally different from the very beginning, none of us would be here. Now, you can't make any sort of evolutionary argument for this. You can't say, well, maybe the expansion rate by chance, whatever that means, just evolved to the right level, the right speed, by chance. Why can't you say that? Because this is an initial condition of the universe. It started precisely where it needed to be. It seems to me the same being that created space-time and matter fine-tuned the expansion rate to be precisely what it needed to be for us to be here. Also, the gravitational force, if it were altered by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40th power compared to the strong nuclear force, we wouldn't exist. What's 1 part in 10 to the 40th power? That's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. I know, neither can I, so let me give you an illustration. Take the entire North American continent, from Central America all the way to the 51st state, Greenland. All right? And stack it in dimes all the way to the moon, 238,000 miles. And then do that on 1 billion other North American continents. Stack them in dimes all the way to the moon. Then take all of those piles of dimes, put them in one huge pile, mark one dime red, mix it in, blindfold a friend, throw him on the pile, ask him to pick that one dime. The chance he would pick that one red dime is 1 chance in 10 to the 40th power. Is he going to pick that dime? No. You got to have a lot of faith to believe that that's going to happen by chance. By the way, chance. Does chance cause things? Who caused this? Chance. He was just here. No. Chance is not a cause. Chance is a word we use to describe mathematical possibilities. Chance doesn't do a thing. You know what scientists mean when they use the word chance? We don't know. Look, there's only 2 possibilities for this value being where it is. It was either designed or it wasn't. What makes more sense? It was designed. This is why even Richard Dawkins and the late Christopher Hitchens would say this is the hardest argument to answer from an atheist perspective. And it's not just our universe that appears to be designed, our solar system appears to be designed with us in mind. Let's take a look at the solar system here for just a second. Here we are, third rock from the sun. If we were just a little bit closer to it, a little bit further away, we couldn't survive. A little bit closer to, we'd burn up. A little bit further away, we'd freeze. We are what scientists call the Goldilocks zone. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it is? That's a lie, it's way too cold here in the winter. The axial tilt, 23.5 degrees, change that slightly, we don't exist. Earth rotation, 24 hours, change that slightly, we don't exist. The size and distance of the moon from us, change that slightly, we don't exist. In fact, if Jupiter was not in its current orbit, we couldn't exist here on Earth. Why? What does Jupiter do for us? Anyone know? It's a cosmic vacuum cleaner. Its gravitational force is so strong that it attracts most of the meteors and space junk to it rather than us. Saturn does the same thing for us. In fact, if you take a close-up look at Jupiter, you know what these dark marks are? Those are comet fragment strikes that are bigger than the Earth. Thank God for Jupiter. Amen. Because if Jupiter wasn't there, we wouldn't be here. In fact, you want to see the size of Jupiter, check it out. There's Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Earth. Look at poor Pluto down here. You know, recently, Pluto has been demoted as a planet. I don't know about you, but I think it's size discrimination. And what if Pluto identifies as a planet? Huh? What then? You bigots? Take a look at this. You can hardly see Pluto. Take a look at this. Here's the sun here. Jupiter is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Earth is invisible. Pluto, forget about it. All right, now keep an eye on Arcturus here. This is a star in our galaxy. It's not outside our galaxy, it's inside our galaxy. Okay, where's Arcturus now? See it? That's Antares. That's another star in our galaxy. The sun is 1 pixel in size on this scale. Jupiter is invisible. Earth, Pluto, forget about it. In fact, if the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse here. Look, I don't name the stars, all right? If the Earth was the size of a golf ball, Betelgeuse would be 5 or 6 Empire State Buildings high. Wow. The heavens are awesome. And this is just in our galaxy. And the average distance between stars in our galaxy is 30 trillion miles, and all that distance is necessary for us to exist safely here on Earth. Now, 30 trillion miles, how far is that? Far. It'll take you at least 2 tanks of gas on a Toyota Prius to go 30 trillion miles. Do you remember when we had the space shuttle? I mean, we just got those astronauts home yesterday. Remember we used to have a space shuttle? Would go around the Earth in orbit. You know how fast the space shuttle was going when it was doing that? About 18,000 miles an hour. That's 5 miles per second. You got trouble getting to school in the morning? Take the space shuttle. 5 miles a second. Think about how fast that is. Well, I did a little calculation to try and figure out how long would it take us if we could get in the space shuttle and go from our star, the sun, to another star inside our galaxy, an average distance away 30 trillion miles. In other words, how long would it take us to go 30 trillion miles if we could go 5 miles per second? How long do you think it would take us?
Hundreds of years.
Hundreds of years. You must be a math major. No? Okay. You're an English major. Okay, all right. It would take us 201,450 years. That means if you got in the space shuttle at the time of Christ and started traveling from our star, the sun, to another star an average distance away inside our galaxy, you've been going 5 miles a second for 2,000 years. You would be less than 1/100th of the way there right now. And we're going to explore space. No, we're not. We're not going anywhere in space. It took us 9 years to get to Pluto. Forget about it. The heavens are awesome. Do you know how long it would take us to get to the next nearest star if we could go light speed, 186,000 miles per second? It would take you almost 4 years to get to the next nearest star. There's no way we're getting there. And if we could get there, well, let's suppose what I'm about to show you here is a little bit disturbing, but you guys can handle it. It's really too far and too dangerous, but let's say we figure out warp speed, we get to another planetary system, we get on a planet, we plant our flag, and then this happens. Beans are not for astronauts, ladies and gentlemen. Now, to show you how analytical my wife is, I showed her that little video, and she paused for just a minute, and then she said, "That's illogical. There's no sound in space." Now, notice what the psalmist says about the heavens. "For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him." How high are the heavens above the earth? Well, the Hubble Space Telescope helped us discover that. Back in 2003, they trained the Hubble on 1/26 millionth of the sky. What's 1/26 millionth of the sky? Go outside tonight, hold a piece of rice up at the end of your finger. That piece of rice represents about 1/26 millionth of the sky. They trained Hubble on this for 11 days of exposure time. I'm going to show you what they found. This is called Hubble Ultra Deep Field. And there's no audio to this, it's just video. I don't know if you can see on the bottom of this screen here, these are mountains. This is the southern hemisphere. When I play this little video they put out, you're going to see the constellations come up, and then Hubble's going to go look at that 1/26 millionth of the sky. You guys ready to go? All right, here we go. Here's Hubble Ultra Deep Field. Let's go. What you're looking at are nearly 10,000 galaxies in 1/26 millionth of the sky. Each of these galaxies have billions of stars of their own. And to go from just one star to another star in our galaxy would take you over 200,000 years at 5 miles a second. And how many stars are there in the entire universe? The number of stars in the entire universe are about equivalent to the number of grains of sand on all the beaches on all the earth times 10,000. And to go from one grain to another grain going 5 miles a second will take you over 200,000 years. Now you know why the Bible says the heavens declare the glory of God. But this creates a problem. Why? Because if this is demonstrating the infinity of God, then we're all in big trouble. Because that means he's infinitely just. And obviously I haven't been infinitely just, and neither have you. So what is God going to do about it? I only read you the first half of the verse. Here's the second half of the verse. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is his love for those who fear him. As far as the east is from the west, so far has he removed our transgressions from us. How has he removed our transgressions from us? If he's infinitely just, I deserve punishment, and so do you. The only way he can remain just and not punish us is if he punishes an innocent substitute in our place. Where's he going to find an innocent substitute? Not in any one of us. We're all guilty. The only way he's going to find an innocent substitute is for him to be the innocent substitute. So he adds humanity to his deity, comes to earth, allows the creatures that rebelled against him to torture and kill him so he could take our punishment upon himself. This is why Paul says in his great book of Romans, Romans 3:26, that God remains just and is the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus, because he's punishing sin. He has to. He's infinitely just. He's the standard of justice. But he doesn't want to punish us, so he punishes himself in our place. This is why this is known as the greatest story ever told. If it's true, it is. This is also why Jesus is the only way. It's not an arbitrary claim. He doesn't say I'm the only way just because I'm God. There's no other way an infinite standard of justice can remain just unless he punishes an innocent substitute who voluntarily takes the punishment. And that's Jesus. Now, we could talk about how you're designed too, but we don't have time for that. We've got to go to the moral argument. And maybe the best way to talk about this is to talk football, all right? This year, Lions this year, okay? Let me ask you a question. How do you know that when Patrick Mahomes threw that pick six in the Super Bowl this year, that was a bad play for his team? How do you know that? Not just the rules, that's part of it. Huh? No. You've got to know the purpose of the game. If you don't know the purpose of the game, you can't tell the difference between a touchdown or an interception. If you know the purpose of the game, to score more points than the other team, then you can say that a touchdown is a good play because it gets us closer to the purpose, where a pick six, when Mahomes throws it to the Eagles, that's a bad play for his team because it's taken him further away from the purpose of the game. If there is no purpose, you can't say one play is good and another play is bad. All you can say is the plays are different. Now notice in football that the purpose of the game comes from outside the game. When they met in the Super Bowl, the Eagles and the Chiefs, they didn't make the rules up. They didn't make the purpose up. Where'd the purpose come from? It came from the commissioner and the owners and the competition committee, and every once in a while they tweak the rules. Why? They can tweak the rules because the game of football is arbitrary. But the game of life isn't arbitrary. The purpose comes from outside the game, and when the purpose comes from outside the game, from the nature of the Creator, then you can say that loving people is a good thing and hating people is a bad thing, because you know what the purpose of the game is, to love God and love one another. If that purpose doesn't exist, you can't say one way to live is good and another way to live. Oh, you can say it, you just can't justify it. In fact, if there is no God, the Nazis were not wrong. It's just your opinion. How did we take the Nazis to trial at Nuremberg? We said that there was a standard beyond their government. That standard is God's nature. Thomas Jefferson called it nature's law. C.S. Lewis called it the moral law. Today we call it international law. It basically is God's nature. If there is no God, everything's just a matter of opinion. It'd just be the Nazi opinion against the Allied opinion. If there is no God, there are no human rights. You know, in our country, we seem to be creating rights every 10 minutes. You notice that? We've got all sorts of rights now. But do you know if there's no God, there's no right to same-sex marriage. There's also no right to natural marriage. There's no right to abortion. There's also no right to life. There are no trans rights, Christian rights, human rights. There are no rights of any kind. It's just your opinion. In fact, this is how our country began. We hold these truths to be self-evident that all men were created and endowed by their government. No, it doesn't say government. By their creator. And governments are instituted to protect or secure these rights. Your government doesn't give you rights. Your government simply secures the rights you already have, if it's a good government. Also, murder, slavery, and racism are not wrong. We know they're wrong because there's a standard beyond us, but if God doesn't exist, that's just a matter of opinion. And we know those things aren't just a matter of opinion. Also, if there's no God, Christians have never done anything wrong. No, we haven't, because there is no such thing as right or wrong. It would be just your opinion. Now, some of you may have heard of Christopher Hitchens. You guys know who Christopher Hitchens was? He was a brilliant British atheist who sounded more brilliant than he was because he had a British accent. And I had a couple of debates with him back in 2008 and 9, and Christopher was very verbally affluent, and he wrote this book, God is Not Great, How Religion Poisons Everything. And much of what he writes in the book is true. Religious people have done a lot of evil things, but I kept asking him, what's your standard to detect what evil is? Because if there is no God, nothing's evil, nothing's good. It's just your opinion. And by the way, religion does not poison everything. Everything poisons religion. I poison religion because I don't live up to the pure words of Christ. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. In fact, during the debate, I had a situation where I said to him, Christopher, I'm a hypocrite. I can't live up to what Jesus told me to live up to. But if I could, I wouldn't need him. And when people say, I can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites down there, I always say, come on down, pal, we got room for one more. The church is a hospital for sinners. It's not a country club for saints. To say you can't go to church because there's too many hypocrites would be like saying I can't go to the gym because there's too many out-of-shape people down there. But that's why they're there. They're trying to get in shape. And one reason you go to church is to get in spiritual shape and moral shape. Now, when somebody claims you are a hypocrite, I think what you ought to do is you ought to agree with them, because I am. In fact, I don't know anyone who isn't a hypocrite. Do you know anyone, whether they're Christian, atheist, or anywhere in between, that perfectly lives out everything they believe? No, nobody does that. Now, I know there's probably people in this room that have been hurt by Christians and hurt by the church. That's very sad, but it's to be expected because we're all fallen. However, I want you to consider something. If that's you, or you know somebody like that, I just want to ask you a question. When somebody plays Beethoven poorly, who do you blame? Pianist. Yeah, you don't blame Beethoven, right? So when somebody plays Jesus poorly, you don't blame Jesus. Look, just because I'm not true and beautiful, or your parents weren't true or beautiful, or your pastor wasn't true or beautiful, and didn't live out Christianity perfectly, doesn't mean Jesus isn't true and beautiful. We're all fallen. If we were true and beautiful all the time, we wouldn't need Jesus. Did I mention this yet, that you can get to heaven by being good? Yeah, you can. You just got to be perfect your whole life. Too late for me. How about you? Okay? In fact, you know what Christianity is? Christianity is the answer to the problem of evil. If we had never sinned, Jesus would not be necessary. Jesus comes into the world to answer the problem of evil. By the way, Christianity is not Christians. Christianity is Jesus. Keep your eyes on Jesus. Finally, you can't complain about injustice or evil if there is no God. Why? Well, C.S. Lewis, early on in his life, was an atheist because he went through World War I, and he saw so much horror in World War I, he said there can't be a good God. Later, after talking to Tolkien, who wrote Lord of the Rings, as you know. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis were in a little writing group together. He realized that his argument against God didn't work, and he actually put it in a book called Mere Christianity, where he pointed out that evil requires good and good requires God. Here's what he said. He said, as an atheist, my argument against God was that the universe seems so cruel and unjust, but how would I got this idea of just and unjust? A man does not call a line crooked unless he has some idea of a straight line. What was I comparing this universe with when I called it unjust? You see, you wouldn't know what a crooked line was unless you knew what a straight line was. You wouldn't know what injustice was unless you knew what justice was. Something can't be not right unless something is. Something can't be immoral unless something is moral. So you're assuming a standard when you're saying something's wrong. In other words, evil is not a thing in itself. It's a lack in a good thing. Evil doesn't exist on its own. It can't exist on its own. It's a parasite in good. Evil is like cancer. If you take all the cancer out of a good body, you got a better body. What happens if you take all the body out of the cancer? You got nothing. It doesn't exist. It needs a host in which to live. Evil is like rust in a car. We're in Motown, right? Evil is like rust in a car. If you take all the rust out of a car, you got a better car. What happens if you take all the car out of the rust? You got a Pinto. Right? In fact, you could put it this way. The shadows prove the sunshine. In order to have shadows, you have to have sunshine. In other words, in order to have evil, you have to have good. Oh, you can have sunshine without shadows. You can have good without evil. But you can't have shadows without sunshine. You can't have evil without good. So if evil exists, and we all know it does, then God exists. Now, I know that's counterintuitive, but evil doesn't disprove God. It may prove there's a devil out there, but it doesn't disprove God, because there'd be no such thing as evil unless there was good, and there'd be no such thing as good unless God existed. Now, this, of course, doesn't answer all the questions. Why does God allow this evil or that evil? That's another question. But to say that there is no God because there's evil in the world, I don't think goes through, because you'd need a standard of good outside of yourself, an objective standard we're all obligated to obey in order to say something's evil. All right? Now, let's sum up these three arguments. From the cosmological argument, we can see we have a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent cause. From the design argument, we can see more evidence that this being is intelligent, and if I had more time, I could develop the fact that he is also sustaining the universe. From the moral argument, we can see that this cause is morally perfect. So from these three arguments, we get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent cause who created and sustains all things. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the God of biblical Christianity, and we haven't even opened the Bible yet. This is called natural theology. You don't need the Bible to know that a creator God exists, a creator God who's a designer, and he's a moral God. In fact, even the ancients knew there had to be some cause out there. They had a pantheon of gods because they believed in cause and effect. So there is some kind of God out there, but how do we know this is a Christian God? We have to keep looking at the evidence. This could be Allah, this could be some other theistic or deistic God. But notice what we've done to this point. We figured out there must be some sort of creator, designer, a moral being by effects. If someone were to ever ask you, if you're a Christian, why do you believe God exists? I think you ought to say, I believe God, or I know God exists by his effects. What do I mean by that? If there's a creation, that's an effect. So there must be a cause, a creator. And if it's a spaceless, timeless, immaterial creation, or that came from a spaceless, timeless, immaterial state, you know the cause must be spaceless, timeless, and immaterial, as we mentioned. If there's design in the universe, that's the effect, then there must be a designer. That's the cause. If there's a moral law written on your heart, that's the effect. You're reasoning back to a cause, a moral law giver. If you have the capacity to know truth outside your skull, that's the effect. You're reasoning back to the fact that there must be a mind that grounds this all. If there's evidence a man predicted and accomplished his own resurrection from the dead, that's the effect. You're reasoning back to a cause. Who could cause somebody, predict his own and accomplish his own resurrection from the dead? Only somebody like God. In fact, you're doing this if you think you've had some sort of personal experience with God. Whether it's a prayer, answered prayer, or you thought God spoke to you somehow. You're doing the same thing. You're saying the answered prayer is the effect, and you're reasoning back to a cause. God. You're saying God is the cause. This is what scientists do. They look at effects and they try and discover what caused the effects they observe. And by the way, what is the queen of all sciences? Close. Theology. Because theology tries to discover if God exists, and if God does exist, how do all these disparate areas of academic inquiry fit under one umbrella of truth? Now, we don't do that at university anymore, but that's what you were supposed to be doing at a university, finding unity and diversity. How does it all fit together under truth? And philosophy is the tool that evaluates it all, because philosophy is about thinking. It's right thinking about reality. You need to be good philosophically if you're going to judge or evaluate evidence properly. A lot of people think philosophy is, sitting around thinking if your navel exists. No, that's not what we're talking about here. And one aspect of philosophy is, of course, logic. All right, so how do we go then and figure out who is the true God? We have to go on to Are Miracles Possible? You're going, Frank, how are you going to finish this? We're running out of time. Miracles do not take long, okay? They don't take long, because God can use a miracle to tell us who the true God is. Here's the problem. In today's society, most people think miracles are impossible. Like, for example, Noah and the ark. Christians, can we agree on one thing? Noah's ark is crazy. Just admit it. Come on. And resurrections. Nobody's seen a resurrection, yet if you're a Christian, you have to believe a resurrection's true. And for some reason, the big problem miracle in the Bible is Jonah. Is that a whale of a tale or a tale of a whale? Can you actually believe in Jonah? Ladies and gentlemen, what is the greatest miracle in the Bible? Yeah, the greatest miracle in the Bible is not the resurrection. The greatest miracle in the Bible is... I got some of you a second time. Yeah. The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. I mean, if God can create the universe out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants that's not logically impossible inside the universe? Of course he can. Well, here's the interesting part. Atheists are admitting the evidence for the first verse. They don't think it's God, but what else could it be? Do you know what Hawking's explanation was? In the last book he wrote, 2010, called The Grand Design, and this is a quote. This is from page about 180, 181. It says this. This is what Hawking said. Because there's a law like gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. Hello, McFly. What? To which John Lennox, the esteemed philosopher and mathematician from Oxford University, said this: when brilliant scientists talk nonsense, it's still nonsense. First of all, gravity didn't create anything. Gravity didn't exist. Gravity describes what happens to a universe that's already created. But he's admitting the data. So if Genesis 1:1 is true, are these other verses at least possible? Of course Noah's crazy, unless God exists. Of course Jonah's a fairy tale, unless God exists. Of course Jesus couldn't have risen from the dead, unless God exists. You just can't rule it out. We live in a theistic world. When people say, I don't believe in miracles, I say, look around, you're living in one. This universe is a miracle. Now, some people will say, I can't believe in miracles because I've never seen one. Well, look, you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. Yeah. You believe in your mind. Have you ever seen it? You're using it right now, I hope. You believe in the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics. You ever seen those? No, you use them all the time. You believe in justice. Have you ever seen justice? I mean, you've seen people treated justly or unjustly, but you haven't seen justice in itself because it's an immaterial reality grounded in the nature of God. You've never seen love, and everybody believes in love. Why? It's not something you physically see. It's not made of molecules. In fact, in our second debate with Hitchens, a student at the College of New Jersey asked Hitchens this question: what is love? And Hitchens, being a materialist, thinking that all that exists are molecules in motion. I mean, Hitchens just thinks you're a molecular machine. You're just a moist robot. Everything you think and do is caused by the laws of physics. So after he kind of hemmed and hawed about an answer, he finally basically said, that love is a chemical. I don't think that would win him many points with his wife. Honey, do you love me? Yeah. Why? Because I got the chemical today. You know, tomorrow I might not have it. No. Love is not a chemical. Love is a decision to seek what's best for the other person, for better or worse, according to what God defines. You've never seen gravity. Sure we have, Frank. There it is. There's gravity. Nope. You're not seeing gravity. What are you seeing? You're seeing the effects of gravity. You know, really, we really don't even know what gravity is. Did you know that? John Lennox asked his scientist friends, what is energy? They can't tell him what it is, yet we use it all the time. You've never seen George Washington, yet you believe he existed. Why? Because he's left effects behind that are best explained by a man who lived from 1732 to 1799. You've never seen Jesus in the flesh either, but he's left effects behind. So you believe in a lot of things you've never seen. Other people will say, well, why don't we see more miracles today? Do you realize that there don't have to be any miracles since Jesus and the apostles for Christianity to be true? No, I think there have been. In fact, Craig Keener has written a hernia-inducing 2-volume set. It's 1,100 pages long about modern-day miracles, but whether he's right about that or not, miracles have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. I mean, imagine if resurrections occurred all the time. What would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? Nothing. You go to somebody and you go, hey, Jesus rose from the dead to prove he was God. And the guy goes, so what? Uncle Leroy just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. No. It's got to be a rare event. It can't be a regular event. Yet we're looking for miracles like, oh, let's see them all the time. Miracles are just supposed to point back to God. So miracles have to be rare if they're going to get our attention. They can't happen all the time, although there are things that happen all the time. And since they happen all the time, they're spectacular, but we get jaded by them. How many moms do we have in here? Do we have some moms in here? How many dads do we have in here? Now, at birth, when you see either your own flesh and blood or somebody else give birth, when you see your own flesh and blood come out of another human being or yourself, you don't go, evolution, right? You go, this is amazing. We made whoopee 9 months ago, and then this. How did this happen? It's incredible. But since it happens every day, we don't call it a miracle. But we ought to know there's a mind behind it. Yeah. So miracles are possible. The only question is now, are there any miracles since the first one, the creation of the universe out of nothing? And for that, we're going to look at the New Testament and see if Jesus really did rise from the dead. Now, in the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, we have a chapter called The Top 10 Reasons We Know the New Testament Writers Told the Truth. We don't have time for 10. We got to get to Q&A. But I just want to mention 2 of them, all right? These are tests that historians make when they're trying to discover if someone's telling the truth in an ancient writing or even sometimes a modern writing. The first is called embarrassing stories. Embarrassing stories go like this. If there's something embarrassing to the author or authors in the text, it's probably true. Why do you think it would be true? No one's going to invent things that embarrass them. You're not going to invent stories that make you look bad. You might invent things that make you look good, but you won't invent things that make you look bad. In fact, let me ask you guys a question in here. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good. And it's not working. We know you're lying. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? You don't do that. You might lie to make yourself look good, but you won't lie to embarrass yourself. Well, the New Testament writers have filled the New Testament with embarrassing stories they never would have invented. That's why we call this the duh factor. In fact, the disciples are not the disciples, they're the disciples. I mean, how often do these people go, we didn't know what he was talking about, we didn't know what he meant. You know, they don't really understand his mission until he's already ascended to heaven. And then they finally get it. And their leaders are often involved in embarrassing things. Jesus calls their leader, Peter, Satan. Do you think that Mark, who wrote this down, said to Peter at one point, hey, Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Look, I'm the leader here. This doesn't look good. And then Peter says, Lord, I'll never deny you. What does he wind up doing? He denies him 3 times. And then at the crucifixion, all the disciples, with the exception maybe of one, they all run away for fear of the Jews. This is like a Monty Python movie. Run away! They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament documents down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here invent that? I mean, if I was there and inventing it, I'd make myself look good, wouldn't you? I mean, I'd write something down like, we marched right down there and we overpowered that elite Roman guard. Yeah, that sounds good. What do you think? John said, get out. Peter roundhouse kicked them. Thomas said, we'll be back. No doubt. Some of you will get that tomorrow. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down to the tomb, and we saw Jesus, who congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women. I would never say it was Mr. Sissy Pants while the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses in that culture? Forget about the fact it was embarrassing to men. It was, but independent of that, why would you never say the women were the first witnesses? Yeah, because a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be the first witnesses. Yet all 4 Gospels say the women are the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They really were, as embarrassing as it was. In fact, one of their primary women witnesses was a formerly demon-possessed woman. Oh, gee, there's a real credible witness for you, huh? They're not making this up. I had a woman come up to me once, and she said, Frank, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out. I said, that is an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that, because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before you hear it from him. You'll be watching the news going, hey, hon, what? Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. The nuke blew up. I've been hot for 3 days. What's for dinner? He's not going to tell you. We were at University of Cincinnati about 1.5 years ago, and a guy came up to me after this presentation, and he said, you think that's bad? I have a friend who was on a private plane, just he and the pilot, and the pilot died on the plane. And my friend did not know how to fly a plane. So just like in the movies, the tower talked him down. When he went home that night, his mother said, how was your day, dear? He said, same old, same old. I can't even believe this next verse is in the New Testament, but it is. You know when Jesus takes his disciples up on the hill in Galilee there and gives them the Great Commission? This is Matthew 28. And he says, go, therefore, make disciples of all nations. Notice he doesn't say make believers. He says make disciples. There's a difference. Anyway, it says of the disciples standing there in verse 17. This is Matthew 28:17. This is the climax, the Great Commission. It says of the disciples watching him give the Great Commission, it says some believed, but some doubted. What? He's standing resurrected right in front of them, talking to them, and they're doubting. It's like they're going, you see that guy over there? Yeah. That guy over there is Jesus. No, it can't be Jesus. He was just killed not long ago. No, I'm telling you it's Jesus. Jesus is dead. It's not him. That's Jesus. Do you know what the Romans did to him? They whipped him. They beat him. They put nails in him. They put a spear in his side. Blood and water came out. In fact, if they didn't kill Jesus, those Roman soldiers could have been killed themselves. I'm telling you, Jesus is dead. It's him. It can't be. It is. How do you know? The women told me. They're not making this up. There's even potentially embarrassing details about Jesus in there. Jesus is considered out of his mind by his own family who come to seize him and take him home. That's embarrassing. That's Mark chapter 3. Jesus' own brothers don't believe in him. We learn later, however, that James, the half-brother of Jesus, dies as a martyr as the pastor of the church in Jerusalem, the pastor of his brother, in 62 AD, about 30 years after the resurrection. How do we know this? But the New Testament documents don't tell us this. Josephus, the Jewish historian, who may have seen this because he lived in Jerusalem. He lived from 37 AD to about 100 AD. And he tells us that James is thrown off the Temple Mount by the Sanhedrin and then stoned to death. Why would he be given his life for his brother who, while Jesus walked the earth, he didn't think his brother was God prior to the resurrection? You know, before the resurrection, James said, yo, bro, you're not God. After the resurrection, he said, yo, bro, you're God. Now, how many people in here have a brother? All right, how many people in here have a brother who thinks he's God? Yeah, you don't believe in him either. Neither did James. Jesus is called a madman. He's called a drunkard. He's called demon-possessed. You think they invented this? He has his feet white with the hair of a prostitute, which easily could have been seen as a sexual advance. And oh, by the way, notice there are two prostitutes in Jesus' bloodline. Who are they? Rahab and Tamar. Now, do you think Matthew, when he was writing the genealogy of the Messiah, he said, you know what, I really think I need to spice up the Messiah's bloodline a little bit. Let me put a couple of prostitutes in here. Rahab, Tamar. No, he's just telling the truth, as embarrassing as it is. In fact, there's a lot of embarrassing people in the bloodline. Judah, from where we get the term Jew from? Jesus, from the tribe of Judah. Judah's the guy that sold his brother Joseph into slavery. And then he was also the guy that slept with his daughter-in-law. He didn't know it was his daughter-in-law at the time, but Tamar, who was posing as a prostitute. And he's in the bloodline of the Messiah. David, a man after God's own heart. Yeah, but he's a liar, adulterer, and a murderer. Gee, I guess there's hope for the rest of us then. Bathsheba's in the bloodline. But you know, when Matthew gets to her, he doesn't mention her name. What does he say instead? Does anyone know? Uriah's wife. He's telling the truth, but it's a slam. Who is Uriah? Husband of Bathsheba, whom David had killed to cover up the crime. They're not making this up. This isn't, we just got back, we just did a trip to Egypt. When you go to Egypt and you go to the monuments of Egypt, you know what those monuments are? They're propaganda monuments to the greatness of the Pharaoh. You don't find that in Judaism. In fact, Dennis Prager, a conservative Jewish man who believes the Old Testament's true, said, the main reason I believe the Old Testament is true is because no people group would ever invent such an embarrassing history of themselves.
Is this true?
You don't find this in other cultures. They exaggerate. Even today, politically, who's ever in the White House or whoever's in power, or even if they're not in power, they spin, right? It's all spin to make themselves look good. They won't admit anything embarrassing. The Bible writers don't do that. They tell you the truth, even though it is embarrassing. Now, there's one other thing. They also hang Jesus on a tree. You don't hang the Messiah on a tree because according to Deuteronomy 21:23, anyone who's hung on a tree is under God's curse. Well, Jesus was under God's curse. What curse? The curse of sin that we put him under. But if you were making this up, you would never say that. In fact, think about this for a second. You know, in Genesis, there are two trees. What are the two trees? Tree of knowledge of good and evil, tree of life. Fast forward all the way to the end. Bible's very symmetrical. What tree do you find in Revelation? Tree of life. You know there's a tree in the middle? The tree in the middle is the tree they hung Jesus on. Because if we sinned at the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, the only way we're ever going to gain access to the tree of life is if Jesus takes our punishment on the tree for us. Now, there's more in the book on that, but we got to do one more, and that's excruciating deaths. And this is the argument that says that these men who were in a position to know whether Jesus had resurrected or not died excruciating deaths when they could have saved themselves by saying it never happened. In fact, this word means out of the crucifixion. That's where we get that word. And you need to remember that all the writers of the New Testament, with the exception of Luke, all the writers of the New Testament are Jews. They think they're God's chosen people. There are two things they didn't think could happen. They didn't think a man could claim to be God. That was blasphemy. And they didn't think one guy would rise from the dead in the middle of time. They knew we'd all rise from the dead at the end of time because Daniel and Isaiah talk about that. But they didn't think one guy would claim to be God and rise from the dead. And yet, what do they say happened? One guy claimed to be God and rose from the dead. In fact, it's really important to keep in mind the apostles' beliefs and practices before and after the resurrection. Before the resurrection, they believed in animal sacrifice. They've been slaying lambs to Yahweh for hundreds of years, and then suddenly Jesus comes along and they go, you know, we don't need to slay these lambs anymore because these lambs are just symbols of the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world. Here he is. Before, they believed in a binding law of Moses. Afterwards, Christ's life fulfills the binding law of Moses. Before, they believed in strict monotheism. Afterwards, they're believing in a Trinity, three persons in one divine essence. Yeah, you can find the Trinity in the Old Testament, but it's much more pronounced in the New. Before, they believed in the Sabbath. In fact, they thought they could be stoned for not obeying the Sabbath. After the resurrection, they're worshiping on Sunday, and Paul even says, don't let anyone tell you you have to obey any Sabbath or festival day. Wow. In fact, out of the 10 commandments, 9 of them are repeated in the New Testament. The only one that isn't? Keep holy the Sabbath. Why? Because the Sabbath has arrived. We rest in Jesus. He does the work. Before, they believed in a conquering Messiah. Afterwards, a sacrificial Messiah. Oh, Jesus will conquer when he comes the second time. Before, they believed in circumcision. Afterwards, they believed in baptism and communion. Now, before we go any further, let's go back to embarrassing for just a second. Ladies and gentlemen, does anyone in this room think that if you were inventing a religion that you would choose this as the symbol? Who would do this? Hey, what do I got to do to join your group? What? I'm out. No, who would do this? Now, ladies and gentlemen, what would cause these pious Jews who thought they were God's chosen people to abandon everything on the left and adopt everything on the right virtually overnight? The only thing I can think of is what psychologists call an impact event. What's an impact event? That's an event that occurs in your life that is so dramatic, so impactful, that it can turn you around 180 degrees just like that. Some impact events are so dramatic that although you might not remember what you had for breakfast this morning, you'll remember an event that happened 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago if you're old enough. There's probably only a few of you in here that can answer this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. If you can remember where you were and what you were doing November 22nd, 1963, hold your hand up and hold it up high. All right, ladies and gentlemen, see these people with their hands up? These people are very old. November 22nd, 1963 is my earliest memory. I was 2 years old and 2 days. Yes, I'm 63 years old now. I know. I don't look a day over 62. In fact, when I turned 50, my wife was very encouraging. She said, honey, you're going to live to be 100. I said, how do you know? She said, because you look half dead already. Anyway, November 22nd, 1963, I'm a toddler. I'm standing in the living room in our home in Wanamassa, New Jersey, and my mother is sitting on an ottoman in front of a black and white TV, weeping uncontrollably. Mommy, what's the matter? They killed the president. President Kennedy assassinated that day. And maybe today we just figured out who did it, didn't we? What did they say? There's like 80,000 documents released yesterday or something. Well, we'll figure it out someday, right? Anyway, she was completely distraught. I'd never seen my mother like that. I can still see her in my mind when she was 26 years old sitting on that ottoman. She's 87 today. But I can see her when she was 26. That's my earliest memory. I don't remember anything before that and very little after that. Where were you, for those who are old enough, when the second plane hit the tower? I was on the phone in my home office in Charlotte, North Carolina, and I had the TV on behind me. I'd seen the tower had been hit. I didn't know by what, and I was talking to a pastor on the north side of Charlotte, and we were trying to figure out what would be the topic if I came to his church. And I said, you got the TV on? He goes, yeah. I said, maybe a Cessna hit the World Trade Tower. And we're talking, and suddenly he screams into the phone. He says, the second tower just got hit. I turned around, looked at the TV, the second tower's on fire. I said, was it a Cessna? He said, no, it looked like a United plane. I said, you saw that? He said, it was just on live TV. I said, look, let me call you back. I hung up the phone. And for some reason that morning, I had CNN on. The Communist News Network. And I'm not making this up, but the commentator on CNN said, one has to think there's some sort of navigational error here. I said, navigational error? You dimwit, this is the clearest day in the history of the Big Apple. What do you think, the pilots can't see where they're going? You think Stevie Wonder's flying these planes? I mean, come on. This is terrorism. I called the pastor, and I said, we're going to talk about Sharia Islam, because that's what this is related to. Now, 9/11, for those of you who are old enough, can remember something about that day. But 9/11 was 23 years ago. For those of you who are old enough, you can remember something about that day. But if I were to ask you where you were 23 days ago, most of you are going to go, I don't know, what was I looking at my iPhone? Wait, let me see what's on here. You wouldn't know. Why? No impact event 23 days ago. Impact event 23 years ago. Probably everybody would remember this. Where were you when the news came down that Trump was shot? Do you remember where you were when you heard the news? What? It's an impact event. Do you think a resurrection would have been an impact event? Do you think they would have had any trouble remembering what happened? No. That's the only way I could figure out why they would have abandoned everything on the left and adopted everything on the right virtually overnight. In fact, think about it this way. What did the New Testament writers have to gain by making up a new religion? What did these Jews get by making up a new religion? They got kicked out of the synagogue, then they got beaten, tortured, and killed. Last time I checked, that was not a list of perks. Right? You don't do that. And they had every motive to say the resurrection did not happen, not every motive to say it did. You know, I get the question a lot. If you're a Christian, you might get the question, are there any non-Christian writers that talk about Jesus and the apostles? Yes. They're all in chapter 9 of I don't have enough faith to be an atheist, but I think often underneath that question is an illicit assumption. And here's the illicit assumption. You really can't trust the New Testament writers because you see, these people were Christians. They were biased. You have to look at the non-Christian writers to figure out what really happened. If you think about that for more than 5 seconds, you'll realize how stupid that is. What did these people have to gain by saying it was true? Nothing. They had everything to lose by saying it was true. They're Jews. Why did they become Christians? They must have seen something. In fact, some of you may know my friend J. Warner Wallace, the cold case homicide detective, who's been on Dateline more than any other homicide detective because he solves murders that are decades old. Jim is also a Christian and took his cold case skills to investigate the greatest homicide of all time, the homicide of Jesus. So he has a book called Cold Case Christianity and a website by the same name. It's worth looking at. Anyway, Jim says that whenever he finds a murdered victim, he knows that he doesn't have to track down 1,000 possible motivations for the murder. He says, that guy was murdered for one or more of these 3 reasons. There was either a sex issue, a money issue, or a power issue. Sex, money, and power are the motivators that can drive people to murder. They're the same motivators that can drive any of us to sin. Why? Because sex, money, and power are good things. In fact, they're so good, we'll often take shortcuts to get them. So Jim says if you're going to say that the New Testament writers invented all this, you have to find one or more of those 3 motivators. So ladies and gentlemen, let's take a look. Did the New Testament writers suddenly get real popular with the ladies for saying Jesus had resurrected from the dead? No, they didn't get sex. Did they get money? No, they weren't 21st century prosperity gospel preachers. Did they get power? No, they got the opposite of power. They were persecuted. Paul had power when he was persecuting the church. As soon as he becomes a Christian, he's persecuted. They didn't get sex. They didn't get money. They didn't get power. There's no motive to make this up. Why would they die for a lie, a known lie? You say, wait a minute, Frank, you know, you've got other religions that'll die. You got Muslims will die, you got Buddhists will die, you got Japanese kamikaze pilots that will die. That doesn't prove they're true, they're right. Yeah, you're right, but there's a big difference between those types of martyrs and the New Testament martyrs. Let's take Islam for a second. The people that martyr themselves today have faith that Islam is true, but they haven't witnessed anything that tells them that Islam is true. On the other hand, the New Testament martyrs witnessed the resurrected Jesus. They saw Jesus, they touched Jesus, they ate with Jesus. They verified with their own senses that Jesus had risen from the dead. Yes, some people will die for something they think is true but isn't. Nobody will die for something that they know is false. And these people were in a position to know whether it was true or false, and they went to their deaths anyway. You can't get a better evidence than that unless you were there yourself. Now, we just did a podcast on this with Dr. Sean McDowell. It's just a couple episodes ago, The Fate of the Apostles. If you want to know what evidence we have for these people dying, check out that podcast, all right? Now, the New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. And how do I know that? Well, first of all, I know this is going to sound odd for some of you. For those of you that believe the Bible is the Word of God like I do, it's going to sound really odd. But stick with me, it's not. It's almost going to sound like heresy. Christianity is not true because a series of documents we put under one binding we call the Bible says it's true. In fact, Christianity would be true if the Bible never existed. Amen. You say, how can that be? Ladies and gentlemen, are you aware that there were thousands of Christians before a line of the New Testament was ever written? Why? Because they witnessed the resurrected Jesus. Then they wrote it down. So they didn't create the resurrection. The New Testament writers did not create the resurrection. The resurrection created the New Testament writers. You wouldn't have these documents written down by Jews in the first century claiming a man claimed to be God and rose from the dead, unless a man really did claim to be God and really did rise from the dead. They have no motive to invent this. It's not an invented story. Now, thankfully, they did write it down so we could know about it and orient our lives according to it, but had they had never written it down, we wouldn't have known about it, but it would have happened. In other words, the Bible doesn't cause Christianity to be true. The Bible is the result of an event that shows Christianity is true. Are you guys with me? Yep. All right. This is why you should never go to somebody and go, oh, you should become a Christian because the Bible says it's true. You got to give evidence that's true. Like if you're a Christian and some Muslim comes to you and says, well, you ought to be a Muslim because the Quran says it's true. What are you going to say? Well, I don't believe in the Quran. He's got to give you evidence the Quran is true. Just like you got to give evidence that the Bible's true. And that's what we're trying to do here. All right? So, let's sum it up. Does truth exist? If somebody says there's no truth, you're going to say, is that true? Does God exist? First argument. Cosmological. One guy was here. Second argument. Teleological. Third argument. Moral argument. From those three arguments, you get a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who created and sustains all things. Are miracles possible? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible? Creation. Genesis 1:1. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible. Is the New Testament telling the truth about the resurrection? We've only looked at two lines of evidence, but embarrassing and excruciating, there are many more. It appears that they're telling the truth. They certainly had no motive to invent it. All right, so if you want to go further, follow this QR code, because I'm going to send you this entire PowerPoint presentation in a PDF format. I showed you maybe, I don't know, 40 slides here tonight. The whole PowerPoint presentation has 362, okay, in a PDF format, and a dozen other PowerPoint presentations as well you'll get. Also, if that doesn't work, just text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. That goes for people watching out there in internet land, on X and YouTube and Facebook. You can do the same thing. Text the word evidence to 855-909-0582. Now, we did bring some books and some DVDs, and I want to point out all the proceeds from the sale of the books and the DVDs will go to feed needy children. Mine. Okay? Just so you know. I got 3 sons, so I need some help. Actually, we got grandkids now. Yeah, all right. So we brought the book, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. We also brought the DVD set, which is about 10 hours long. It's an entire course. And you can get workbooks, teacher and student workbooks off our website if you want to teach this kind of thing. We also brought this book, Hollywood Heroes, my son and I wrote. I know there's a lot of garbage that comes out of Hollywood, but you would probably be shocked to learn that the top movie franchises of the past 40, 50 years have all stolen from the greatest story ever told. Whether we're talking about Batman or Wonder Woman or Captain America or Iron Man or Lord of the Rings or Star Wars or Superman or Spider-Man or Harry Potter. Harry Potter? You would be shocked to learn that J.K. Rowling took the storyline out of the Bible. And so if you know anybody that likes those movies, they're going to love Jesus, because who's the ultimate hero? Jesus is the ultimate hero. They're all modeled after Jesus, people who sacrifice themselves to save others. All right, so it's true. Before we get to your questions, so what? So what if it's true? Well, the best news of all, ladies and gentlemen, someone actually did die for you. Now, when I was in the Navy, I was in naval aviation, and we had to earn golden wings, which are fairly hard to earn. But there's nothing more difficult to earn than a golden trident. Very few people that start SEAL training make it through. Maybe 5%, 1 out of 20 will make it through SEAL training. Those that make it through wear that trident with pride. It is their identity. When Michael Monsoor was buried in Rosecrans Cemetery in San Diego, California, just about every Navy SEAL on the West Coast showed up for his funeral. And when they passed his casket, they took off their tridents and they pressed them into his casket. They took their identity and put their identity in the one that sacrificed for them, the one that died for them. That's what we're supposed to do. But our culture says, oh no, put your identity in your sexual preference, or put your identity in your job, or put your identity in your bank account, or put your identity in another person. Ladies and gentlemen, do you realize how fragile those identities are? Like, suppose you put your identity in your sexual preference. What happens when you can no longer sexually perform, or probably sooner than that, you're no longer sexually preferred? You no longer have an identity? What happens if you put your identity in your job and you lose your job? You no longer have an identity, or you retire? What happens if you put your identity in your bank account and there's a crash? You no longer have an identity? Or even another person. What happens when that other person dies, or God forbid leaves you? You no longer have an identity? You know, your identity is not in those temporal, some of them are good things, but they're not in those temporal things. Your identity is meant to be put in the one that died for you. Do you realize that Christianity is the only worldview where you don't achieve your identity, you receive your identity? If you have to achieve your identity, all the pressure's on you, and there's always somebody that can do it better. But if you simply receive your identity, it's eternal, it's given to you by your Creator, you have it forever, you're an heir to the throne, you're in the kingdom, you can't lose that. And by the way, He proved it by rising from the dead. Do you realize everyone's going to rise from the dead? Yeah, the only question is where you're going to live. God's not going to force you into heaven against your will. If you don't want Him now, you're not going to want Him in eternity. There's another way of looking at this. Everyone you love will die. Everything you build will crumble. Everything you say will be forgotten. Everything you do will come to nothing. You and your identity will die and vanish unless the resurrection's true. Then there's really hope. If the resurrection's not true, let's eat, drink, and be merry, because tomorrow we die. Nothing matters anyway. I think there's strong evidence the resurrection's true. The question is, what are you going to do with it? God's not going to force you into heaven against your will. All right, so what we're going to do now is go to questions. And before we go to questions, I want Chase to come up and tell us about Ratio Christi, because, come on up, Chase, because this organization, it really does apologetics every week. It does evidence every week. So if you want to learn more about this right here on campus, you can. Go ahead.
Yeah, my name is Kay. This is John A. Jude. We're members of Ratio Christi.
Just go right up to the mic here, Chase, so they can hear you. Go ahead.
We're students of Wayne State University, and Roster Christi is a Christian apologetics group. We learn about, how we want to defend our faith and learn certain things about the Bible and stuff. And we have free pizza. They start at Mondays at noon, and on the Student Center, room 780. It's on the 7th floor. Check it out. Come.
Mondays at noon, free pizza, 780 in the Student Center?
Yep.
All right, and they put this on, so... Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Thanks, guys. Yeah, if you want to go further, anybody can come. It's a free club. So Mondays at noon, 780 in the Student Center, bring an appetite. And you don't have to be a Christian to come. You can be anything you want. All right, so now we're going to move on to questions. And since no one likes to ask the first question, we're going to move right on to the second question. Second question, microphone, so people out there in the world can see and hear you. So who wants to go? Once we get the first question, then things will move. All right, Walter's going to go first. Go ahead, sir. All right. Yes, sir, go ahead.
So I want to talk about in Vatican II in 1950, the Catholic Church formally said that we have always known that Peter is the Pope from verses in Matthew 16:15 through 18. He said to them, "But who do you say that I am?" Simon Peter replied, "You are the Christ, the Son of the living God." Jesus answered him, "Blessed are you, Simon Bar-Jonah, flesh and blood has now revealed this to you. My Father who is in heaven. And I will tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I'll build my church. The gates of hell shall not prevail against it." And so, who's the rock? Is it Peter or his faith?
Well, that's what Christians are going to argue over. Catholics will say the rock is Peter, and Protestants will say no. And that's going to be an intramural debate among Christians, but it seems to me that Peter himself said the cornerstone is Jesus in his own letter. He's not saying he is the rock. He's saying that Jesus is the cornerstone of Christianity. So I would say that appears to be the proper interpretation, although there is a play on words here, because rock is also part of Peter's name, and also they're in Caesarea Philippi, where there's big rock walls which represented different gods. They had different temples there, so you kind of have to know the landscape there. We've been there several times to kind of figure out what's going on. But even if you were to say that means Peter is the Pope, or whatever Pope means, he was the leader of the church initially, that doesn't necessarily mean there's some sort of succession after him, even if you were to say that. So, and I also think, look, I came from the Roman Catholic Church. I have a lot of friends who are Roman Catholics. I have a lot of respect for the history of the Roman Catholic Church. There's some doctrines that the Roman Catholic Church teaches that I don't think are biblical, so I'm not a Roman Catholic anymore. And when people say, "Do you think Catholics can be saved?" I say, I even think some Baptists can be saved, okay? But I think when Roman Catholics will say that we need a pope to interpret the scriptures, my response to that would be, well, I still got to interpret what the pope says. So why am I going to take the word of a man who is not inspired when we know, we all agree, Catholics or Protestants, we all agree that the writers of the Bible were inspired? Why don't we just interpret what they say rather than putting a middleman in there, because we're still going to have to interpret what he says. You can't get away from interpretation. Someone has to do it. So I don't think having the Pope, although the Pope may give us some good insights, that really doesn't help us very much, because other people can look at the scriptures too and give us good insights. So I don't think the idea that we need a pope to interpret the scriptures is helpful, because we still need to interpret what he says. Does that make sense?
It does, Frank. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, Walter. All right. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Dr. Bruce Russell, who's been teaching philosophy here at Wayne State University since 1978. Dr. Russell, go ahead, sir. And thank you for coming, by the way.
There are several things I agree with you on, and I'm glad you defended them, namely this kind of independence of truth and the endorsement of logic. We're on board there with each other. And the acceptance of the principle of non-contradiction, of course. And actually, although some people might be surprised, think that miracles are possible. The questions for me are not just about truth, but mainly about justification. So truth is the object of my beliefs, but whether I hold them or not depends on what evidence I have for them. So I actually have an answer to your question that you pose to atheists like me. If Christianity were true, would you accept it or believe it? And my answer is, no, that's the wrong question. If it were rational to believe it's true, I would accept it.
Yeah, that's what I mean by the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just to be clear. So now the ones I don't agree with are your answers to the God exists and the resurrection issues. And I can't do this here. Of course, I do it in my philosophy of religion class, go through all those traditional, cosmological, teleological, moral arguments. And they're all open, as philosophers know, to very serious criticism. I can't do all that here. It's unfortunate, it's not a debate. I've debated Guyvid and William Lane Craig and Bert Spalding here, but this isn't a debate, so I have to limit what I have to say. The general picture is there are arguments for the existence of God, and there's a problem of evil, which I think is a killer argument against. Not your version of the argument from evil, mine. So I'm just going to focus on one of the arguments for, but you can ask me about other ones if you wish.
Go ahead.
It's
Yes,
a
sir.
matter of time.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the moral argument. So this is one I thought was the worst case that William Lane Craig and Guyvid and many other theists make, because I think there are necessary moral truths that you can know by understanding the concepts. I think it's necessarily wrong-making to rape someone. I think it's wrong to betray a friend. I think it's wrong to exploit people. I think it's wrong to harm people just for the fun of it, and so on.
We agree. The question is, what justifies that being wrong?
The answer is, it's a conceptual truth, like the truth that knowledge requires true belief, or the truth that, I don't know, 2 + 2 is 4. That doesn't mean that everyone always believed these necessary truths. I think it's a necessary truth that slavery is wrong. That, of course, doesn't mean that everybody believed it, but there are many examples in logic and math where people believed false things and only later came to see that there were truths that were necessary truths that they thought were false.
Right, but right now we're talking epistemology. How do you know something?
The question is by knowing, understanding the concepts, as in math, as in logic, and in epistemology. I gave that example. How do I know that if you know something, it's true? The answer is because the very concept of knowledge implies that's so.
Right. Knowledge, as you know, I'm just doing this for the audience.
Okay.
How you know something's called epistemology, but the object you're knowing deals with ontology. The question is, if there is no God, what is the standard that says murder is wrong and rape is wrong and love is good? And why are we obligated to obey it if there is no God?
That's equivalent to the question for me, how do we know that 2 + 2 is 4 if there's no God? The answer is we know that 2 + 2 is 4, independent of any kind of evidence or knowledge of God, because we understand the concepts. And though morality is not about numbers, it's about wrongness. And there are certain concepts that are linked necessarily to wrongness, like rape and exploitation and the list I partly went through.
Right, the question is, why is it wrong to rape or murder if there is no God, there is no purpose to life, and we're just overgrown germs? We're just, as someone said, we're either God imagers or we're clever, murderous monkeys fighting for control over the banana supply.
That's a false dichotomy.
Why is it, though, Dr. Russell? Why is it wrong to say, or why do we have a moral obligation if there's no purpose to life?
Oh, because we can have obligations that are not tied to purposes. We're not all consequentialist about morality, but so you can have, breaking a promise can be wrong.
Why?
Well, look, this is a question I think you're asking me is, why is 2 + 2 = 4? That makes no sense. If you agree that it's conceptually necessary that if you rape somebody, you do something wrong, then it makes no sense to ask, well, how can it be wrong if there's no purpose in life or so forth?
Okay, well, first of all, you might be surprised, maybe not to learn, that I believe math is grounded in the nature of God as well. Because you don't think that math is a human conception, do you?
I know, I think it's a human discovery. They just are truths. There are always
right,
been
you're discovering truth.
But it doesn't take God for those truths to exist. 2 + 2 would = 4, regardless of whether God exists or not.
Well, how would 2 + 2 = 4 be true if nothing existed?
Well, if nothing existed, I mean, even the proposition 2 + 2 = 4, it couldn't be, but there's a proposition 2 + 2 = 4 that's necessarily true. And so there are propositions as well as lecterns and microphones and professors.
Okay, but my contention is nothing would exist unless God existed. As Leibniz said, if there is no God, why is there something rather than nothing at all? And I think math is actually an argument for a mind, and the idea that our universe is mathematically describable, I think, points back to a mind who created and sustains this universe.
Well, you assume that things, there must be some reason for things to exist, but there needn't be reasons for necessary truths to exist. Certainly there needn't be the reasons you cite, namely that life has to have some other lively purpose in life, that those truths could exist. Why do they exist? Because they're necessary truths. That's the
necessary.
nature of it.
Why is anything necessary if there is no God?
Well, why is it? I mean, don't you think? I don't know. This seems like a killer example to me, but you don't take it as one. That it's necessarily true that 2 + 2 = 4. That if you know something, what you know is true. That it's wrong to rape people. It's wrong to exploit them.
I agree with all that. I agree with you, and I are on the same page, Dr. Russell, that all those things are true. My question is what grounds those truths? Because you're not a materialist, are you?
No.
Okay, so how do you ground immaterial reality?
Why is there something rather than nothing, do you mean?
No, immaterial reality. How do you ground the laws of logic, the laws of mathematics, the laws of morality, if there's no God? How are those things grounded?
Because actually they're the best explanation of what we discover when we start investigating math and logic and whatnot.
Right, but you're talking epistemology. Again, I'm talking ontology. Why do those things exist to discover to begin with?
Okay. I'm giving you a reason to believe why they exist. I thought you were asking me for that. Why we should believe they exist is because they best explain our discoveries when we start doing math and logic. And all you're giving are evidential arguments. Every one of your arguments doesn't guarantee truth. It's an evidential argument. I'm giving an evidential argument to think that there are necessary math, logic, truths, and truths about epistemology and ethics.
Well, I'm using the laws of logic and my senses in order to discover truths outside of myself.
But you're not using just logic and your senses. You're using something like inference to the best explanation.
Yes.
Well, so am I.
Okay.
I'm using inference to the best explanation to explain why you should believe that there are logical, mathematical, and ethical truths that are necessarily true, which means true in every possible
Well, I agree they're true in every possible world, but I just don't see any grounding on it on atheism. Why?
But that means you just rejected my inference to the best explanation argument for their existence that has no implications about God.
Hey guys, please. Go ahead. Sorry, sir.
No,
Go ahead.
I said you just rejected my inference to the best explanation why we should believe that there are math, logic, and moral truths
I'm
independently of the existence of God.
I'm asking for the grounding of those things. Obviously, math and logic are not moral issues. Morality is an obligation.
The only arguments you give for the grounding in God are inferential arguments just of the same sort, but with different conclusions. You have ontological conclusions that are based on inference to the best explanation, and I have exactly the same kind of argument to infer that there are necessary truths that don't require God's existence.
Well, that's where we disagree. I can't see how there's any obligation if we're just overgrown germs.
We're not just overgrown germs. We're people with brains, and having brains enables us to have certain emotions and thoughts and so forth that make us distinct from a lectern or a mouse.
Yes, that's true. The question is, how did we get here? And if we got here by a blind process, it doesn't matter how big of our brains are. They're just different in degree, and there's no overall arching purpose to life. It makes no difference in the end whether we murder one another or we love one another.
Oh, no, that doesn't follow at all.
Well,
you just rejected my arguments and said there are necessary moral truths.
All right, well,
thanks.
Okay, thank you,
I've
Dr.
gone on
Russell.
too long.
Yes, thank you. We can talk some more later, but I appreciate you coming. All right. Leona, go ahead.
Hi, thank you so much for speaking today. I was very excited for this. You can ask all my Wayne State crew friends. I've been talking about this for weeks. So thank you for coming out. I had a question about the concept of sin in the Catholic Church, because I'm evangelical and I know you are too. So I have a lot of Catholic friends who will quote 1 John 5 to me to justify the difference between moral and venial sin.
Okay.
So they'll quote 1 John 5, verse 16 through 17, and it says, "If anyone sees his brother committing a sin not leading to death, he shall ask God." If anyone sees his brother committing a sin not leading to death, he shall ask, and God will give him life. To those who commit sins that do not lead to death, there is sin that leads to death. I do not say that one should pray for that. All wrongdoing is sin, but there is sin that does not lead to death. So do you think that this passage justifies saying that there's two types of sins?
Well, I think there's more than two types, actually, because I think that Jesus talked about this. He talked about greater commands, greater love, greater responsibility. To whom much is given, much will be required, greater punishment, greater reward. I mean, this is even true in our own judicial system, right? Murder is a greater crime than, say, jaywalking, and we punish people appropriately, at least most of the time, for those crimes. And the same thing is true when it comes to Christianity. Yes, all sin separates us from God, but not all sin is equal. Some are worse than others.
Yeah, so I had a conversation with my friend the other day, and she made the argument that if we sin right before we die, that doesn't mean we can get to heaven, because she thinks it would be like a mortal sin at that point. So what would I say in response to that?
Well, I would say that Jesus's grace and his sacrifice covers it all. If you have to add anything to Jesus, you're involved in heresy, because what the scriptures talk about is we're saved by grace through faith, not of works. It also talks about the fact, if you look at the book of Galatians, Paul is saying it's Jesus plus nothing, not Jesus plus circumcision. In Colossians, he's talking it's Jesus plus nothing, not Jesus plus angels. The writer of Hebrews says that Jesus is greater than any other, whether it's angels, whether it's Moses, whoever it is. Jesus is the key. And of course, in Galatians, Paul says that if righteousness could be attained by the law, then Christ died in vain. Why send Jesus at all if you could just so-called be good and make it to heaven? Now, we don't believe that you can just be good and not go to jail if you've committed a serious crime, right? There's no judge well, there's some crazy judges out there. Most judges are not going to say if a defendant says, sure, I killed the guy, but think about all the good I've done in society. You know, the judge isn't going to say, oh, you've done so much good. Well, that cancels the murder you just committed. Or no judge would say if the guy said, yeah, I killed that guy, but think of all the other people I didn't kill, right? You wouldn't, the judge isn't going to say, oh, you're right, you haven't killed all these other people, so I'm going to let you go. But we don't even do that in our own judicial system. Why do we think that if we just do enough good works, it's going to cancel all the bad things we've done? That's not how justice works. All right? And there's only two things we're going to get in the afterlife. We're either going to get grace or we're going to get justice. I don't want justice. Does anyone here want justice? No. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, yes. Hi.
Thank you, Dr. Turek,
Yes.
for coming out here, and thank you for your service as
Get a
well.
little closer, Ethan.
Thank you for your service as well, and thank you for your time just here. It really eye-opening. I was just wondering, when do you think we will go to be with Christ in the end times? Is it pre-trib, mid-trib, or post-trib?
I am on the welcoming committee, not the planning committee. So I don't know when Jesus is coming back, and he as a man didn't know either, and he doesn't want us to know either. Let me do you know that in 1 Corinthians chapter 2, Paul, speaking of the prophecies of the Old Testament, said about Jesus coming the first time, these things were hidden because if the rulers of this age knew, they never would have crucified the Lord of glory. In other words, yeah, there's Old Testament prophecies in the Old Testament, but they're scattered all over the place, and they weren't put together in one neat package so you could figure it all out. And when you get the New Testament, the events of the New Testament provide the box top to the jigsaw puzzle of the Old Testament. Once you get the New Testament events, you go, oh, now I see how all these prophecies fit together. I didn't see it moving forward, but now I do. I mean, have you ever tried to put together a jigsaw puzzle without the box top? It's really hard to do. Once you get the box top, you go, I see how the pieces fit together. Paul is saying that God left it veiled and hidden to a certain extent in order for the mission to go through. I think he's doing the same thing now. There are people way smarter than me, know the original languages, they're equally conservative, and they come to different conclusions about the end times. I mean, I have my opinions, don't get me wrong, but it's not going to be a hill I'm going to die on. And I think God wants it to be like a thief coming in the night, because suppose we knew that Jesus was going to come back and say 2034. We'd all go, I got time. I'm going to live it up. In fact, in the beginning of 2034, maybe the end of 2033, I'm going to run those credit cards up, right? I'm just going to do, it would change our behavior for the negative. So I think that God wants us to know that he could come at any minute like a thief in the night. And how it's going to happen, when it's going to happen, I think it's purposefully veiled. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
So much.
All right. Hey.
Hi, so I have a friend that thinks we're like all humans are angels, and that we're like fallen angels, and I want to know what would be how can I talk to my friend to let her know that that's not real?
They
That's
think
not true.
we are fallen angels?
Yes.
Okay, when somebody says something, it's not your job to refute what they say, it's their job to support what they say. So you need to ask that person, why are you saying that? First of all, what do you mean by that? Why are you saying that, and what evidence do you have for it? And then see what they say. And then maybe they have good arguments you haven't thought of. I don't know. Probably not. I'm just saying, but give them that courtesy to say, tell me why you think that's the case. And then go through it. But no, I don't think we're fallen angels. Fallen angels are called demons. Although there's some of us act that way sometimes, right? But so, no, I don't think that's the case. But I would let them make their case, and I would ask them for the evidence. Does that make sense?
Yes, and my second question would be correct me if I'm wrong, did you say that there is some sins that are worse than others?
Sure. Yeah, there's some sins worse than others, yeah.
So, like, you don't think that all sin is, like...
I think all
on the
sin
same
separates us from God, but all
Okay.
sin is not the same in terms of consequence or what's the word I'm looking for here? Consequence or guilt, right? A man who jaywalks is not as guilty as a man who murders someone, right? I mean, they're both guilty, but not to the same degree.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
Hey, Dr. Turek.
Hey, what's your name?
My name's Adam.
Adam, go ahead, sir.
Yes, sir.
The first
I wanna
man,
start
Adam,
off
right
by
here. Here he
thanking
is.
you for what you do. I learned tonight that, like C.S. Lewis, I suffered a crisis of faith after serving in Iraq. And your work,
Thanks for your service. All right.
my privilege, my honor. Your work helped me come back to the Lord, so thank you. One question that I've been wrestling with forever is, how can there be a heaven for us if the ones we love are in hell?
Yeah, C.S. Lewis actually dealt with that. And he basically said hell can't veto heaven. It wouldn't be heaven if hell could veto heaven. But I know this is going to sound strange, but I think it's true. Hell is just. And the people in hell, as C.S. Lewis writes in The Great Divorce, would be misfits in heaven. People make their own choices. And if they make their own choices and they get justice, that's a good thing. It's better if you get grace, but if you don't want grace, if you want to continue to will your own will opposite God, you can. I mentioned earlier that Christianity is the answer to the problem of evil. You might be surprised to learn that God doesn't end evil, he just quarantines it. He puts it in a place called hell, so the people in his presence don't have to experience the negative effects of evil. But he respects the free choice of people he creates who reject him, because that's what a loving being does. He withdraws his presence and he gives them justice. And just like there's going to be degrees of reward in heaven, there'll be degrees of punishment in hell, because that's what justice demands. So no one is ever going to get to the afterlife and go, God, I got a raw deal. By definition, God is the standard of justice. Will not the judge of all the earth do right, says Moses in Genesis 18? Of course he's going to do right. So people in hell are getting what they deserve, and people in heaven are getting what they don't deserve, which is grace.
Okay.
All right?
Thank you.
All right, thanks. Yes,
How
sir,
you
what's your
doing,
name?
Frank? Terrell.
Huh?
Terrell.
Terrell?
Terrell. Terrell.
Terrell.
Terrell.
All right, go ahead,
You got
sir.
it?
I don't have a monitor up here, and since I'm 63, my hearing doesn't work as well as it used to.
Gotcha. So I want to read a quote real quick from one of my favorite pastors, John MacArthur. He said, "Man's nature is so corrupt that he has neither the will nor the power to come to Christ unless drawn by the Spirit." My question is, when it comes to our salvation, is it all God, or is it something that we have to do?
MacArthur's right that nobody's going to come to God unless God's Spirit draws them. But I believe God draws all people, and only some accept the drawing. So Jesus said that the Holy Spirit would convict the world of sin, not just the elect. But not everybody receives the Holy Spirit. People reject it, because that's what free will allows you to do. It wouldn't be love anyway if it was a robot world, right? If you had no ability to reject. That's why we have evil, by the way. The reason we have evil is because God gave us free will. We can use our free will for good, but we can also use it to go our own way. But that's the only way you can have love, is if you have free will.
So do we have a choice in it?
Of course we do.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not really us choosing him. Is it him
We
choosing
would not
us?
choose him unless he chose us first. He's going to come to us first. But I believe God's Holy Spirit goes to all, and only some accept the invitation.
I'm asking this because I got a friend that I deal with who, when we talk about this, he goes on the defense that God is sending people to hell because he
what?
didn't choose them.
Well, that's one of the negative, I think, outcomes of hard five-point Calvinism.
Yeah.
And I think that makes God the author of evil.
Right.
And that's why I don't think it's true. Now, when God elects to create this universe, he knows how it's going to turn out. And he knows that some are going to believe and some not believe, but he's not causing them to believe and not to believe. They're freely making the choice. You say, well, why doesn't God create a universe where everyone believes?
Right.
That might be logically possible, but not actually achievable with free creatures. Because what God can't do is he can't force free creatures to do what he wants, because then they wouldn't be free. So is God obligated not to create it all because some people reject him? I don't think so. I think God gives everyone a fair shot, and the people that reject him do so freely, and the people that accept him do so freely. So God gives us the opportunity to be forgiven, but some people don't want to be forgiven. They still want to go their own way. All right?
Love what you do, man.
All right, thank you, brother. Thanks for coming. Yes, ma'am. What's your name?
Hi, I'm Jillian.
Hey, Jillian.
Hey, so I'm asking you a question on behalf of my cousin over there because she was too nervous to come up. Her name is Tanaya.
All right.
Yes.
Go
So
ahead.
she wants to ask. She says,
asking for a friend.
Yes, asking for a friend. Because I have my own question. But anyway, she says, are miracles done by God? And if so, why does he pick and choose what miracles to perform? Or does he pick and choose which miracles to perform? And I think she's trying to understand, like, how do you recognize a miracle from God?
Okay, well, first of all, let's just look at the New Testament. Notice that Jesus does miracles in 4 categories: sin, sickness, nature, and death. Why are those the 4 categories? Because those are our 4 problems. We sin, we get sick, nature can hurt us, and we die. So Jesus, through those miracles, is demonstrating that he is our Savior. He saves us from those 4 problems. This is demonstrating that he truly is our Savior. He's not doing random displays of power. He's doing displays that show he is the Lord of the universe and can correct what's wrong with this world. That sin can hurt us, that sickness can hurt us, that death can hurt us, obviously, and nature can hurt us. And so those miracles are done to demonstrate that he is the Savior, which is why when we see other groups like, say, Joseph Smith and the Mormons come along and say, I've got golden plates, I go, so? First of all, golden plates are not a miracle. I can create golden plates in my garage if I have the right materials, okay? Joseph Smith is doing nothing to demonstrate that he is a prophet. Yet you have people trying to say that that shows that Joseph Smith is a prophet. Now, if he could prove these golden plates did come from heaven somehow and were in line with the Bible, the pre-existing revelation, we might say, oh, we got some new revelation here, but he can't demonstrate that, and he can't, it actually contradicts the Bible. It could come from the other side, right? Yeah. So I think if we're looking for a Messiah, we want a Messiah who's going to save us from our troubles, and that's what Jesus does.
Perfect.
Okay?
Was that good enough for you, Tanaya? Okay,
all right.
Great. And then I do have my own
question. Go ahead.
So I wanted to ask you, do you believe that faith in God is something that we can just know as a basic part of our experience, or do you think it must be established through logical arguments and empirical evidence, or is it a merge of the two?
You're talking about 2 different things. One is belief that, and the other is belief in. Belief that is getting evidence that God exists, that Jesus rose from the dead, that the Bible's telling the truth. But all the belief that in the world does not require you to assent to it. That's belief in. And we know this even in relationships. Like when I first met my wife 40 years ago, I got evidence that she would be a good wife, but all the evidence in the world didn't make her my wife. I had to take a step of trust in her to ask her to be my wife, and in a momentary lapse of judgment, she said yes. All right? So belief that is just of the head. Belief in is not only of the head, but of the heart. That's a decision you make. Okay? Yes. Once you have belief that, you move to belief in. We do this all the time. You're all believing that the chair can hold you up. You probably didn't think about it explicitly. We're all believing that the roof's not going to fall in on us. Yeah. And tomorrow when I get on the plane to go back to Charlotte, I don't only believe that the pilots are trained and ATC is going to get us there, I believe in them by getting in the plane. Mm-hmm. Right? There's a difference between belief that and belief in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
How you doing? Can you hear me?
Yeah, what's your name, sir?
Munaj.
Say again?
Munaj.
Munaj. Go ahead.
So my question is, well, actually, I was watching a debate between Bill Craig and Bart Ehrman, and Bart Ehrman said that it's virtually impossible for a scholar, particularly a scholar, because we know Bill Craig is an analytical philosopher,
Yeah.
for a scholar to prove that Jesus rose from the dead, because that would require bringing in theology and philosophy. And as a Christian, I found myself kind of agreeing with it, because I feel like it will require us using philosophical arguments and theological arguments and our own ideological biases to also add in and prove it. Whereas if you were just like, well, you can be a believer and still look at it, okay, we can't directly prove that Jesus rose from the dead by just looking at the evidence. You would have to use philosophy and theology. I just want to get your opinion on that.
Well, first of all, what Bart Ehrman doesn't seem to understand is he has a theological position too. And his theological position is that miracles don't occur. Why is that the right theological position to take? Everybody has a theological position. The only question is, what is the proper theological position? I think the proper theological position is to be open to both causes, a natural cause or a non-intelligent cause and an intelligent cause. If you're going to rule out intelligent causes in advance, well, suppose there really is an intelligent cause. You've just ruled out the only possibility that's opposite your one possibility, and your possibility has got to be a natural cause, right? Or you're going to say that everything has to happen inside of nature, that there can't be any sort of intrusion in the natural world by a supernatural being.
Well, just to piggyback on that, he actually in the debate said miracles could be possible, but in this particular case, with the resurrection hypothesis, that it would be the least probable explanation. So he actually says supernatural events could occur.
And I would ask him, why is it least probable given the evidence? Because you evaluate the probability based on the evidence that you have at hand. You don't do a priori probability where you rule stuff out. I think if you look at the evidence from the New Testament documents and other materials related to it, the best explanation is that Jesus rose from the dead. In the context that this is a world that was created, and the greatest miracle is Genesis 1:1, so God can intervene if he wants to. Also, I might point out to Bart Ehrman that if he doesn't believe in the supernatural, he shouldn't believe in anything he thinks. Because if only natural causes exist, that would require that every thought he had was given to him by the laws of physics. And if his thoughts are caused completely by the laws of physics, why should he think they're true? So you and I are having a supernatural experience right now, because we are dealing in the immaterial. It's not just physics that are going on when we're talking to one another here. There's not just brains talking to one another, there are minds talking to one another, and we're using immaterial laws, like the immaterial laws of logic and mathematics. We are conversing right now in a way that goes beyond the natural. Are we using the natural? Yes, but it goes beyond the natural. And for Bart Ehrman to say nothing can go beyond the natural, he shouldn't believe anything he thinks are rights if he says that. All right?
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir.
My name's Jacob.
Jacob, go ahead.
My question deals with the law of non-contradiction. So your claim is that there is no individual truth, only the truth.
Well, it depends on how we define that. I mean, I could say that I like chocolate and you like vanilla, and it's my subjective opinion that chocolate's better, and it's your subjective opinion that vanilla's better, but it's objectively true that I think chocolate's better and you think vanilla's better.
Okay, well then, so this gets into my question
All
here.
right.
How do we address the different denominations within Christianity if there is only one truth?
Well, newsflash for those of us that wish everybody would agree, humans hardly agree on anything, right? We have all sorts of things we disagree on. And I think that's more a nature of human beings than it is the truth. I mean, even as Dr. Russell was talking about the other day, we all agree that, murdering people is wrong. We may have different justifications as to why, And as Dr. Russell mentioned earlier, some people might think murder's okay, but that doesn't mean it's okay. So we all have things that we may disagree on, but that doesn't mean that truth doesn't exist just because people disagree over it, right? There are some people that might think 2 + 2 = 5, or that math is racist. You probably heard this, right? Okay. They may think that, but it's not true. It doesn't add up.
Okay. So if there is an objective truth, is it possible that anybody can realize it?
Well, sure, it's possible if your faculties are working properly, sure.
Okay, so you have what you believe to be the objective truth, and then you have somebody in another denomination who believes what they have is the objective truth. How do we distinguish what is actually the objective
Well, first of all, let's talk about denominations for just a second. The denominations that believe the Bible is true may disagree on secondary and tertiary issues, like mode of baptism, like eschatology, those kind of things. But they'll agree on the essentials. There is a God, you are not him. Jesus is the second person of the Trinity. He is God. He lived the perfect life in your place. He came to be a sacrifice, and by trusting in him, your sins will be forgiven. You know, they'll believe the essentials, right? Okay? Those are the people that believe the Bible's true. There are a whole number of denominations out there that do not believe the Bible's true.
Well, we have denominations that do believe. They have disagreements on salvation, on essentially how you end up going to heaven.
Sure,
so it's not minor disagreements here. This is serious disagreements.
All right, well, let me go back to my Roman Catholic days for a second, okay? One of the problems I had with the Roman Catholic Church is I thought they put tradition over the Word of God. This is the same thing that Jesus was scolding the Pharisees for. You nullify the Word of God on account of your tradition, okay? So I don't think tradition, when I say I believe in sola scriptura, which means the Scripture alone, doesn't mean I get all my evidence for everything from Scripture. That's not what it means. It means when it comes to faith and practice, the Scriptures are my authority, not popes, not church councils, not early church fathers, not any other additional tradition. The Scriptures are the authority. And so part of the problem is, who is our authority? The Roman Catholics will say we have Scripture, but we have all these other authorities as well. Most Protestants will say, no, we just have the Scriptures. That's where some of the disagreement comes in.
Well, and then you'll get 1,000 different people who read the Bible, and you'll get 1,000 different interpretations of what things mean. So even if there is an objective truth.
So you're saying that when people read the Bible, they all agree on it?
Well, clearly not.
No, that's what you're saying. Right?
No, I'm not saying that. I did not say when everyone reads the Bible, they all agree on it.
Oh, so you're saying I'm wrong?
I'm not saying that you're wrong.
You're saying I misinterpreted you. Right? That's what you're saying. You're saying I misinterpreted you, right?
Not even necessarily, but.
No, you were saying that there's many different interpretations of the Bible, and I said, so you're saying there's only one, and you said, no, I said there are many. And so now I'm saying I misinterpreted you, right? That there was an objective meaning that you were trying to communicate, and I got it wrong.
Well, you purposefully restated it incorrectly.
Yeah. Well, people can do that, don't they?
Well, this is another problem when we get into the area of thousands of denominations. Who do we go to for authority? We can say we go to the Bible.
Yes.
But that I could read something out of the Bible. It means one thing to me. It means one thing to someone in the audience, and it means a different thing to you.
So you're saying that when people read the Bible, that they all agree? Do you see what I'm doing here? You think that you can be clear, but the Bible can't be.
I'm not saying the Bible can't be clear.
Okay.
I'm saying who determines the clarity? Who determines the objective truth?
No one determines objective truth. We discover objective truth.
Okay.
Okay. Now, we might have some misinterpretations. We might have traditions that we're siding with more than the Scripture. We may not know the background of the Scripture and not be able to exegete it properly. There may be a number of different reasons. That's why it's a lifelong study. And you're not going to get good at anything by casual contact. That's why you have to study to show yourself approved. But you can find people disagreeing on almost anything. That doesn't mean there's no truth to be known. It means that people have other reasons and maybe other inadequacies that prevent them from knowing the truth.
Okay. Can I ask another question related to a different argument?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so this one is kind of touching on the earlier discussion about the justification of morality.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just going to throw this one out here and say, so if God doesn't exist, what is the purpose of behaving in a moral way? Could we just say natural consequences?
Well, that might be a sort of utilitarian way of looking at, yeah, I'm going to do what's ever best for me, the consequences. But that wouldn't get somebody like Stalin off the hook, who did, for his own benefit, murder a lot of people so he could have power and die comfortably on his deathbed at the age of 74. Right? Why should he not murder people if utilitarianism is his goal or is his method?
Well, I think referring to something historically, it's not as relevant as to say, why should I behave in a moral way right now?
Well, first of all, I would ask the question, what is moral to begin with? Now, as Dr. Russell and I were talking about earlier, we'd probably agree on most morality, okay? We were disagreeing over the grounding of morality, okay? And we would probably all agree that certain things are right and certain things are wrong. And the reason I think that's the case is because it's written on our hearts, as our Declaration of Independence says and the Apostle Paul says in Romans chapter 2. Okay, so you'd expect people, even if they don't believe in God, to all agree on big issues.
Yeah.
So the question is, you're saying that I ought to obey it because of my consequences, just to me, and I'm saying that sometimes you can do evil and it'll benefit you, so why shouldn't you do evil if that's your method of behaving?
Because you may feel guilty about it.
What if I don't?
We would have to assume that you don't.
Well, I'm saying people do things all the time that just benefit them and hurt other people, and they sleep well at night.
How do we know that? How do we know they don't feel guilty?
Well, I can tell you a friend of mine who doesn't, because he's a sociopath. He doesn't even feel guilt. His name is David Wood. Some of you know David Wood. Okay? And he knows it's wrong, but he doesn't feel anything with it. When he was a kid, he had a dog, Goliath. David and Goliath. And one day he came home and his mother was all upset that the Goliath died. And David said, it's just a dog. Right? He didn't have any emotional connection to it. So, I mean, there are people that don't feel guilt. And even if you do feel guilt, you still might think it's worth it to have $10 million in your bank account because you just embezzled it. Right?
In the moment, it might come back to haunt you.
Yeah, you don't know what's going to happen long term. This is one of the problems with utilitarianism. You say, well, you can do whatever you want as long as you don't hurt somebody else. Well, first of all, how do you know you're not going to hurt somebody else long term? And what does hurt mean? Is it just physical? What about emotional? What about spiritual? What about moral? There's all different ways you can hurt people that people don't take into account. And since you don't know the future, you don't know whether it's going to hurt someone or not. All right, let me move on. Thank you. Good questions.
Thank you.
Okay, sorry for the brief interruption, which may transform into an even larger interruption. I was just notified that we're supposed to be out of this room at 10 o'clock, and that, I guess, includes equipment. So I don't know how long it takes Dr. Turek and his assistant to remove some of the equipment. I just wanted to notify them of that. And one more thing I should have mentioned before, we have a Schoolcraft and a University of Michigan Ratio Christi chapter as well I want to talk about. U of M, they do theirs in Dearborn Tuesdays and Wednesdays at 12:30, correct? So if you know anybody there, or if perhaps you just come from some other place and that would be more convenient for you for whatever reason, there's that. And our Schoolcraft chapter meets Thursdays, that's tomorrow, at 11 a.m. at Schoolcraft College in the Vista Tech building. So I just wanted to drop that there. And Dr. Turek, you can tell me what you want to do.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to shut it down then, because it takes probably half an hour to break all this stuff down. Are you right? Is that right, Clint? Yeah. All right. We're sorry. We can talk offline. Thank Ratio Christie for putting this on, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, next week we'll be at Mississippi State, Lord willing, on Thursday nights. We live stream that as well. And then later on in April, we have Wright State University in Dayton, Ohio. So if any of you guys out that way, see you there. I know you guys don't like Ohio, but you won it one year, they won it the next, okay? All right, thanks guys, see you.